The Dragon in the Sword. Book 3. Hither, hither, if you will, drink instruction or instill, run the woods like vernal sap, crying hail to luminousness, but have care, in yourself may lurk the trap, on conditions they caress. Here you meet the light invoked, here is never secret cloaked. Doubt you with the monster's fry, all his orbit may exclude. Are you of the stiff, the dry, cursing the not understood? Grasp you with the monster's claws, govern with his truncheon saws, hate the shadow of the grain, you are lost in Westermain. Earthward swoops a culture sun, knighted upon carrion, straightway venom wine cups shout, toasts to one whose eyes are out. Flowers along the reeling floor drip henbane and hellebore. Beauty of her tresses shorn shrieks as nature's maniac, hideousness on hoof and horn tumbles yapping in her track. Haggard wisdom, stately once, leers fantastical and trips, allegory drums the sconce, impiousness nibble nips. Page 574. Imp that dances, imp that flits, imp or the demon growing girl, maddest whirl with imp or the pits, round you and with them whirl. Fast where pours the fountain rout, out of him whose eyes are out, multitudes of multitudes, drenched in wallowing deviltry, and you ask where you may be, in what reek of a lair, given to bones and ogre broods, and they yell you where. Enter these enchanted woods, you who dare. From the poem by George Meredith, The Woods of Westermain. Chapter 1. We had gone perhaps 5 miles, when the green wood on all sides began to rustle urgently, as if threatened. We had only the shadow path to guide us. Steadfastly, in spite of the rapidly increasing agitation, we continued to go forward in single file. Alizade was immediately behind me. She whispered, "It is as if the forest senses our presence and becomes alarmed." Then, one by one, the oak trees turned to stone. The stone became liquid, and in an instant the entire landscape was transformed. The path remained visible, but we were surrounded by monstrous green stems, and at the top of these stems, far above our heads, were the yellow bells of gigantic daffodils. "Is this what lies behind the illusion?" said von Beck in awe. "This is as much reality as it is illusion," I told him. "Chaos has her moods and whims, that's all. As I told you, she cannot remain stable. It is in her nature to be forever changing." "While it is in the nature of law," Alizade explained, "to be forever fixed. The balance is there to ensure that neither law nor chaos ever gain complete ascendancy, for the one offers sterility, while the other offers only sensation." "And this struggle between the two, does it take place on every single realm of the multiverse?" von Beck wanted to know. He looked around him at the nodding flowers. Their scent was like a drug. Page 576. Every plane, on every level or another, in some guise or another, it is the perpetual war, And there is a champion, they say, who is doomed to fight in every aspect of that war for eternity. Please, Lady Alizard, I interrupted, I would rather not be reminded of the eternal champion's fate. I was not altogether joking. Alizard apologized. We continued in silence along the path for about another mile, until the landscape shuddered and changed for the second time. This time, in place of giant daffodils, were gibbets. On every gibbet swung a cage, and in every cage was a scabrous, dying human creature, crying out for help. I told them to ignore the prisoners and keep to the path. "And is this mere illusion?" shouted Von Beck from behind me. He was almost in tears. "An invention, I promise you. It will vanish, as the others vanished." Suddenly, the prisoners were gone from their cages. In their place were huge finches squalling for food. Then the gibbets disappeared, the finches flew away, and we were surrounded by tall glass buildings for as far as the eye could see. These buildings were in 1,000 different styles, yet were unstable. Every few moments one of them would fall with a great crashing and tinkling, sometimes taking one or more of the neighbouring buildings with it. To follow the path, we were forced to wade through shards of broken glass, which set up a great clatter as we advanced. Voices sounded now from within the buildings, but we could see that the houses were empty. Shrieks of laughter, wails of pain, horrible sobbing sounds, the moans of the tortured. The glass gradually began to melt, and as it melted took the form of agonized faces, and those faces were still the size of buildings. "Oh, this is surely hell," cried Von Beck, "and these are the souls of the damned." The faces flowed up into the sky, turning into great metal blades in the form of fern leaves. And still we made our way slowly along the shadow path. I forced myself to think only of our goal, of the dragon sword which could take the Eldrum women to their homeland, which must not be allowed to fall into the hands of chaos. I wondered what means Sheridan would use in trying to defeat us. For how long could she maintain a semblance of life in that corpse, my doppelganger? Page 577. A wind howled through the metallic leaves. They clashed and jangled and set my teeth on edge. They offered us no direct danger, however. Chaos was not in herself malevolent, but her ambitions were inimical to the desires of both human and Eldrin, as well as all the other races of the multiverse. Once in that iron jungle, I thought I saw figures moving parallel to us. I lifted the Actorius. It could easily detect creatures of ordinary flesh and blood, but if someone had been trailing us, they were now too far away for the stone to find them. In seconds, the ferns became frozen snakes. Then the snakes came to life. Next, the living snakes began to devour one another. All around us was a great swaying and writhing and hissing. It was as if a tangled hedge of serpents lined both sides of the shadow path. I held tight to Alizard's trembling hand. "Remember, they will not attack us unless directed. They are hardly real." But though I reassured her, I knew that any one of Chaos's illusions were real enough to do harm in the short span of their existence. But now the snakes had become country brambles, and our path was a sandy lane leading towards the distant sea. I began to feel a little more optimistic in spite of knowing how false my security was, and had begun to whistle when I rounded a turn in the path and saw that our way was blocked by a mass of riders. At their head, our old enemy, Baron Captain Ahmed of the Frowning Shield. His features had become even more bestial in the time since we had last seen him. His nostrils had widened so much that they now resembled the snout of a pig. There were tufts of hair sprouting from his face and neck, and when he spoke, I was reminded of the lowing of a cow. Page 578. These were Sharadim's retainers, the same we had left behind when we dashed for the gateway into this realm. Evidently, they had lost no time in following us. We were still without weapons. We could not fight them. The bramble hedges were solid enough and blocked flight in that direction. If we wished to flee, we would have to run back the way we had come, and we would easily be ridden down by the horsemen. "Where's your mistress, Baron Porker?" I called, standing my ground. "Was she too cowardly to enter chaos herself?" Ahmed's already narrow eyes came closer together still. He grunted and sniffed. His nose and eyes seemed permanently wet. "The Empress Sharadim has more important business than to chase after vermin when there is the greatest prey of all to hand." Ahmed's remark was greeted appreciatively by his fellows, who gave forth a great chorus of snorts and grunts. All of them had faces and bodies transformed by their espousal of Chaos's cause. I wondered if they had noticed these changes, or if their brains were warped as thoroughly as their physical appearance. I could barely recognize some of them. Duke Erekose's thin, unpleasant face now bore a distinctive resemblance to a starved hamster. I wondered how long in relative time they had been here. "And what's the greatest prey of all?" Von Beck asked him. Again we were talking in the hope that the next change in the landscape would be to our advantage. "You know what it is," shouted Ahmed, his snout twitching with rage and turning red. "For you seek it yourself. You must do. You cannot deny it." "But do you know what it is, Baron Duke Ahmed?" said Alizard. "Has the Empress allowed you into her confidence? It seems unlikely when the last time she spoke of you she complained that you were poor material for her purposes. She said you would be disposed of when your turn was served. Is it served now, do you think, Lord Baron Captain? Or have you been given what you most desired? Are you respected by your peers at last? Do they cheer their King Admiral whenever his hull passes by? Or are they silent because the Frowning Shield is as filthy and disgusting as ever, but is now one of the last hulls still rolling in the Mashenheim?" Page 579. She mocked him. She goaded him. And all the time she was testing him. I could see that she was finding out what Sharadim's instructions had been, and it was becoming plain from Ahmed's restraint that he'd been ordered to take us alive. His tiny eyes glared murder, but his hands twitched on his saddle horn. He was about to speak when Von Beck broke in. "You are a foolish, stupid, greedy man, Baron Captain. Can you not see that she has rid herself of unwanted allies? She sends you into chaos. Meanwhile she continues her conquest of the 6 realms. Where is she now? Fighting the Eldren women? Wiping out the Red Weepers?" Now Ahmed lifted a triumphant snout and voiced something close to laughter. What need has she to fight the Eldren? They are gone. They are all gone from Kistenheim. They have fled before our navies. Kistenheim is absolutely ours." Alizard believed him. It was plain he did not lie. White and trembling, she yet controlled herself. "Where have they fled? There is nowhere. Surely they could go." "Where else but to sanctuary with our ancient allies? They have gone into Adelstain and crouch with the Ursine princes behind defences while my empress's army lays siege. Their defeat is inevitable. A few fight on with the pirates of my own realm, but most huddle in Adelstain, awaiting slaughter. They have used the gateway between Barrowbeni and the Ursine stronghold," murmured Alizard. "It is their only possible strategy against such forces as Sheridan commands." Again Baron Captain Armiad lifted his snout in a kind of laugh. "Conquest has been swift across all the 6 realms. For years my lady made her plans. And when the time came to put them into action, how wonderfully she has been able to achieve her ambitions." Page 580. "Only because few rational people can ever begin to understand such a lust for power," said von Bach feelingly. "There is nothing more puerile than the mind of a tyrant." "And nothing more frightening," I added under my breath. The bramble hedges began to curl upwards, forming spirals of gauze in 1,000 colours. Without a word, Alizard, von Bach and myself dived from the path and into the tangle of rustling linen, while at our backs charged the yelling, clumsy pack, made clumsier still by the grotesque distortions of their bodies. Yet they were mounted and had the advantage of us. We had lost the shadow path. We darted from one piece of cover to the next. Baron Armiad and his companions blundered in pursuit, hooting and bellowing. It was as if we were chased by a pack of farmyard beasts. There was nothing comical, however, about our terror. All we had was an idea that Sheridan had ordered us taken alive, but in their blind stupidity these creatures might easily kill us by accident. Desperately I sought for another shadow trail, holding the Arctorius out before me. The streamers of gauze became great fountains of water, shooting high into the sky. It was between these that we now ducked and dodged. Then Duke Erekose had sighted Alizard, and with a triumphant snort had drawn his sword and was bearing down on her. I saw von Bach turn and try to reach her, but I was closer. I flung myself upwards, grasping the Draconhema's wrist and twisting the sword from a hand which now more closely resembled a paw. Alizard dropped down and picked up the blade even as I threw my whole weight against the Duke and forced him off the horse and onto the ground. "Von Bach," I cried, "into the saddle, man!" I thrust the Arctorius upon Alizard, who took it, looking baffled. Now more of the chaos creatures had sighted us and were charging in crowded formation towards us. Page 581. Von Bach swung up and helped Alizard seat herself behind him. I ran for a while beside the horse, yelling for them to go ahead of me and try to find a new trail. I would do my best to find them. Then I was turning to face the charge of a Mabdan barbarian whose lance was aimed directly at my groin. I sidestepped the lance and grasped the haft, dragging it down and to the right, hoping the Mabdan was fool enough to hang on to it. He came off the saddle as smoothly as if it had been greased, and now I had his lance. In seconds I'd taken the barbarian's place on the horse and was riding after my friends. Both von Bach and myself were more proficient horsemen than the warriors who came in our wake. Darting in and out of the great fountains, we gradually escaped Baron Ahmed and his pack. Then another reflecting wall came between us and them. We dimly saw them on the other side. There was no particular reason for the wall to compose itself at that particular point. It was merely a random win of chaos. But it proved lucky for us, as, sweating, we slowed our pace. I saw Von Beck turn in his saddle and kiss Elisard. She responded enthusiastically to this. She flung her arms around him. The Arctorial stone clutched in one beautiful hand. And it was Ermizad who kissed my friend. It was Ermizad who betrayed me. The only betrayal I had thought impossible. Now I knew for certain it was she. All along she had deceived me. I had slain whole peoples because of my love for her. I had fought in 1,000 wars. And this was how she returned my loyalty. What was worse, Von Beck, whom I had believed a comrade, had no scruples in the matter. They flaunted themselves. Their embraces mocked everything I held dear. How could I have trusted them? I knew then that I had no choice but to punish them for the pain they now caused me. Page 582. Steadying my horse, I lifted up the lance I had taken from the Mabden. I weighed it in my hand. I was skilled in the use of such weapons, and knew that one single cast could pierce the pair of them, uniting them in death. A fair reward for their treachery. Ermizard, how is it possible? Now my arm went back as I prepared to throw. I saw Von Beck's cowardly eyes grow big with disbelieving horror. I saw Ermizad begin to turn, following the direction of his gaze. I laughed at them. My laughter found an echo. It seemed to fill the whole realm. Von Beck was shouting. Ermizad was shouting. Doubtless they were pleading for mercy. I would give them none. The laughter grew louder and louder. It was not merely my own laughter I heard. There was another voice. I hesitated. A tiny shout came from Von Beck. Herr Dacre, are you possessed? What is it? I ignored him. I had come to realize how he had tricked me, how he had deliberately courted my friendship, knowing that he was to keep a liaison with my wife. And had Ermizad helped him plan the deception? It followed logically that she had. How had I failed to guess all this? My mind had been clouded by other, less important issues. I had no need of a dragon's sword. I had no loyalty to the Six Realms. Why should I let myself be distracted by these problems when my own wife dishonored me before my eyes? I ceased to laugh at that point. I poised the lance for the throw. And then I realized that the laughter was continuing. It was not my laughter. I looked to one side and I saw a man standing there. He wore long robes of black and dark blue. There was a familiarity about his face I could not place. He had the look of a wise, well-balanced statesman in middle years. Only his wild laughter denied this impression. Page 583. Now I knew that I looked upon the ruler of this realm, at the Archduke Balarisaf himself, and without thinking I flung the lance directly at his heart. He continued to laugh, even as he looked down at the haft which protruded from his body. "Oh, this is fine amusement," he said at last. "So much more interesting, Sir Champion, than conquering worlds and enslaving nations, don't you think?" And I realized just barely that I was victim of this realm's hallucinatory influences. I had almost killed my two best friends in my madness. Then the Archduke Balarisaf had vanished, and Alizard was crying out to me to look. With the Actorius, she had found another shadow path, dimly visible ahead of us, but of still greater interest was the large brown hare, which loped along it. "We must follow it," I said, even as I began to tremble in reaction to what I had almost done. "Remember what Seppieris told us? The hare is our first link with the sword." Von Beck offered me a wary glance. "Are you yourself again, my friend?" "I hope so," I told him. I was riding ahead now, riding after the hare, which continued with characteristic insouciance to lead us along the shadow path. Soon the track had narrowed, and the horses were stumbling on loose rocks. I dismounted, leading my mount. Von Beck and Alizard followed my example. The hare appeared to wait patiently for us. Then it moved steadily on. At last the beast stopped at a point where the trail appeared to go through solid rock. We could see a wide valley below us, a river which looked as big as the Mississippi, a massive fortress seemingly all made of silver. Still dismounted, we approached the hare and the wall of rock. I reached out for the beast, but it hopped away from me. And then, quite suddenly, I was falling into blackness, falling through the melancholy emptiness of the cosmic void. Page 584. And it seemed to me I heard Balarisaf's laughter again. Had he allowed ourselves to be trapped by the Archduke of Chaos after all? Were we consigned to limbo for all eternity? Chapter 2. I felt that I had fallen for months, perhaps years, before I realized the sensation of movement was gone, and I was on my feet on firm ground, though still in utter blackness. A voice was calling to me. "John Dacre, are you there?" "I am here, Von Beck, wherever here may be. And Alizard?" "With Count Von Beck," she said. Gradually we managed to grope our way towards each other and link hands. "What is this place?" Von Beck wondered. "Some trap of the Archduke Balarisaf's?" "Possibly," I said, though I was under the impression that the hare led us here. Von Beck began to laugh. "Aha, like Alice, we have fallen down a rabbit hole, yes?" I smiled at this. Alizard remained silent, plainly baffled by the reference. She said, "The realms of chaos have many places where the fabric of the multiverse has worn thin, others where worlds intersect at random. They cannot be charted, as we chart our own gateways, yet sometimes they exist in one place for centuries. It could be that we have fallen through one of those gaps in the fabric. We could be anywhere in the entire multiverse." "Or nowhere, perhaps," said Von Beck. "Or nowhere," she agreed. I still maintained the view that the hare had led us here intentionally. "We were told to find a cup, that the cup would lead us to the horned horse, and the horned horse would lead us to the sword. I have faith in Seppieris's powers of prediction. I think we are here to find that cup." Page 586. "Even if it were here," Von Beck argued, "we could hardly see it, could we, my friend?" I bent down to touch the floor. It was damp. There was a mildewy smell about the place. As I ran my hand further, I confirmed my guess that we stood on old, worn flagstones. "This is man-made," I said, "and I would guess we are in an underground chamber of some sort, which means there must be a wall. And in the wall, perhaps, we'll find a door. Come." And I led them slowly across the floor until at last my fingers found a slimy block of stone. The stuff was unpleasant to the touch, but I soon confirmed that this was indeed a wall. So we followed the wall, first to one corner, then to another. The chamber was about 20 feet wide. Set in the third wall was a wooden door with iron hinges and a huge old-fashioned lock. I took hold of the ring and turned it. Tumblers clicked with surprising smoothness. I tugged. There was light beyond the door. Cautiously I pulled it open another inch or two and peered into a corridor. The corridor had a low, curved ceiling and seemed as old as the chamber. Yet at intervals along it there ran what I recognized at once as ordinary 20th century light bulbs, strung on visible flexes, as if placed there for temporary use. The corridor ended on my right at another door, but on my left it stretched for some distance before turning a corner. I frowned. I was deeply puzzled. "We seem to be in the dungeon of a medieval castle," I whispered to Von Beck. "Yet there's modern lighting. Take a look for yourself." After a moment he pulled his head back in and closed the door. I heard him breathing heavily, but he said nothing. "What's the matter?" I asked him. "Nothing, my friend. A premonition, call it. We could be anywhere, I know, yet I have a feeling that I recognize that corridor, which is, you'll agree, unlikely. One such place is much like another. Well, shall we explore?" "If you feel ready," I said. He uttered a faint laugh. "Of course. My mind's somewhat disturbed by recent events, that's all." Page 587. And so we stepped into the corridor. We made a peculiar sight. Alizard in her ivory armour, myself in the heavy leather of a marsh warrior, and Von Beck in his imitation 20th century costume. We proceeded cautiously until we reached the turn in the passage. The place seemed deserted, yet plainly was in use, judging by the lights. I peered up at the nearest bulb. They were of an unfamiliar pattern to me, yet clearly operated according to the usual principle. We were so engrossed in exploring this corridor that we were too late to look for cover when one of the doors opened and a man stepped out. We stood there, ready to challenge him as best we could. Although there was a faint imprecision to his form, he seemed solid enough. The sight of his costume was, moreover, enough to shock me, and as for Von Beck, the man gasped aloud. We were face to face with a staff officer of the Nazi SS. He was engrossed in some papers he carried, but when he looked up, it was to stare full in our faces. We said nothing. He frowned, stared again, visibly shuddered, and then, muttering to himself, turned away. As he walked in the opposite direction, he rubbed his eyes. Alizard chuckled. "There is some advantage to our situation," she said. "Why didn't he speak to us?" Von Beck asked. "We are shadows in this world. I have heard of such things frequently, but never experienced it. We have only partial substance here." She laughed again. "We are what the Eldren have always been called in 6 realms. We are ghosts, my friends. That man believed himself to be suffering from an hallucination." "Will everyone here think the same?" Von Beck asked nervously. For a ghost, he was sweating badly. He, better than I, knew the implications of being caught by those brutes. "We can hope so, I suppose," she said, but she could not be sure. "Sight of that man has terrified me. Count von Beck, it is he who should have been afraid of you." Page 588. "I can understand something of this," I told her, "and I believe Separatists may have found a way to keep his pledge to Count von Beck whilst also having his own purposes served. You said you thought you recognized this place, Von Beck. Now, do you recall where you may have seen it before?" He bowed his head, rubbing at his face with his hands. He apologized for his condition, then straightened his back, nodding. Yes, a few years ago, a distant cousin brought me here. He was an ardent Nazi and wished to impress me with what he claimed to be the resurrection of ancient German culture. We are in the so-called hidden vaults of the great castle of Nuremberg. We are at the very center of what the Nazis considered their spiritual stronghold. Of course, it would be impossible for an outsider to come here now, but then their numbers were fewer. They were less respectable. They had less power. These vaults are said to be as old as the first Gothic builders who were here before the Romans. They lie under the main hillside on which the castle is built and were evacuated in fairly recent times. When I came here, there was much talk of their discovery of the foundations of the true Germany. But I was used to that kind of nonsense by then. I found the place disturbing largely because of the value my Nazi relative placed on it. Very soon after I had visited, I heard it was forbidden for anyone but the highest of the Nazi hierarchy to come here. Why, I do not know. There were the usual rumours of Hitler's black magic rites and all that, but I didn't believe them. My theory was that a secret military installation of some kind was being built here. In those days it was still necessary for the Nazis to pretend to be honouring their armistice agreements. But Sepiris said the hare would lead us to a cup. I said in some bafflement. What sort of cup are we expected to find in Nuremberg? I am sure we shall discover that in good time. Alisard had become impatient with this talk. Let us continue. Remember that much still depends on us. We have the fate of the 6 realms in our hands. Page 589. Von Beck looked about him. I remember that there was a main vault, a kind of ceremonial chamber which my cousin seemed to believe had some kind of near-mystical importance. He called it the hub of the Germanic spirit, some such nonsense. I must admit I was almost as bored as I was sickened by his talk, but perhaps that is what we should look for. Do you remember the way? I asked him. He considered for a moment and then pointed. It is where we were going. That door at the far end. I'm fairly sure that it opens onto the main chamber. We followed him now. 2 other Nazis passed us, but only one saw us, out of the corner of his eye, and again it was plain he did not trust his vision. If this was contemporary to von Beck's, I could imagine that most of these people were short of sleep, and had become fairly used to hallucinations of one kind or another. Indeed, if I had been a member of the SS, I too would probably have been seeing all kinds of ghosts. Von Beck paused outside of a door which was evidently of recent workmanship, though in the Romanesque pattern of much of the rest. I think this is the chamber I mentioned, he said. He hesitated. Shall I open it? Taking our silence for assent, he reached towards the large iron ring and tried to turn it. It refused to move. He put his shoulder to the oak of the door and pushed. He shook his head. It's locked. I suspect there are modern locks on the other side. It hardly gives. Could it be that since our substance is, as it were, somewhat diffuse on this plane, we cannot exert enough force on the door? I asked Alisard. She had only a little knowledge of the phenomenon. She suggested that all we could do would be to wait to see how others opened the door. There could be a trick to it. Accordingly, we drew ourselves into a nearby alcove and, hidden in the shadows, watched as various Nazi officers came and went in the corridor. Page 590. There were no armed soldiers here, which led us to suppose that the Nazis felt themselves secure at this level. We had waited perhaps an hour and were growing impatient with this plan when a tall grey-haired man in black and silver robes which resembled the uniform of the SS turned a bend in the corridor and advanced towards us. He looked like some kind of officiating priest, for he carried a small box in his hand. Pausing at the door to the chamber, he opened the box and produced a key which he inserted into the lock. This was turned. We heard various tumblers moving. The door swung open. A musty scent came from the chamber beyond. Immediately we followed, quietly, behind the grey-haired man, and plainly he was preparing the chamber for some rite, just as a priest might prepare the church. He lit tapers, and with these he ignited large candles. The stones of the vault were certainly ancient. The roof was supported by dozens of arches, so that it was impossible to tell its actual dimensions. The flames sent shadows flickering everywhere. It was not difficult for us to hide. When the officiary had completed his task, he left the chamber, closing and locking the door behind him. Now we were free to explore. We realized that the place had been designed fairly recently as a temple of some kind. At the far end was an altar. On the wall behind the altar was the black, red and white of the Nazi hooked cross, surrounded by insignia of equal barbarity, versions of ancient Teutonic symbols. Upon the altar itself was a stylized silver tree, and beside it the figure of a rampant bull in solid gold. "This is the stuff which some Nazis wish to put into our churches," whispered von Beck. "Pagan objects of worship which they claim are the symbols of the true German religion. They are almost as anti-Christian as they are anti-Semitic. It is as if they hate every system of thought which is in any way questions their own mishmash of pseudo-philosophy and mystical claptrap." He stared at the altar in disgust. "They are the worst kind of nihilists. They cannot even see that they destroy everything and create nothing. Their invention is as empty as any invention of chaos I have seen. It has no true history, no concrete substance, no depth, no quality of intellect. It is merely a negation, a brutal denial of all Germany's virtues." Again he was close to tears. Alizard took his hand. She knew little of what he spoke, but she felt deeply for him. Page 591. "Try to consider our purpose here," she murmured. "For your own sake, my dear." It was the first time I had heard her use such a term, and the stabbing jealousy came again. Oh, how I longed for the consolation of such a woman, someone so close to being my own Ermizad that I might easily have pretended it was she. But I was able to gather my senses once more. I remembered the madness which had come over me such a short time ago. I was in constant danger from such delusions. Von Beck was grateful for her concern and her reminder of his purpose here. "A cup, the Grail, is frequently part of this cult's paraphernalia," he said, "but I cannot see it anywhere." "The Grail? Weren't you telling me when we first met that your family has some connection with the Holy Grail?" "A legend, that's all. Some of my ancestors were said to have seen it, others were said to have held it in trust. But the story became too fanciful, I think. One legend even said that we held it in trust not for God, but for Satan. I read all this when I was seeking a means of discovering what I thought were old passages to lead me secretly out of Beck without the Nazis realizing. That was how I came upon the maps and books relating to the Middle Marches." He stopped as we heard a sound from the corridor. Swiftly we withdrew into the dark shadows of one of the arches. The door opened once more, sending a shaft of electric light into the gloom. 3 figures now stood there. None was particularly tall, and we could not see their faces because of the high, stiffened collars which framed their heads. Page 592. The cloaks looked like those worn by certain orders of warrior priests, such as the Knights Templar, and indeed these men carried great broadswords in their gauntleted hands, while under their arms were heavy iron helmets, which looked as if they had been forged in the Dark Ages. There was a look of barbaric strength about the three figures, which was entirely the result of their chosen costume. As they moved forward towards the altar, closing the door behind them and bolting it, I saw that one was very thin and walked with a limp, another was rotund and wheezed a little as he made his way beneath the arches, while the other moved with a peculiar artificial stiffness, his shoulders set back in the manner of a short man who wished to appear taller than he was. I put out my hand to hold Von Beck's arm. He was trembling. I was not surprised. There could be very little doubt that we were in the presence of three of the 20th century's arch-villains. The three men were Goebbels, Göring, and Hitler, and everything I'd ever read about their bizarre mystical beliefs, their faith in supernatural portents, their willingness to accept the strangest and most unlikely notions, was here proven at last. Believing themselves unobserved, they began to chant lines from Goethe. In their mouths I felt the words were defiled and horribly abused. As with so many other romantic notions, they perverted the German poet's ideas to their own miserable purpose. They might as easily have chanted the incantations of a black mass or defiled a synagogue with their filth. The effect was somehow the same. Allen Gewaltein, zum Schutz sich einhalten, nimmer sich beugen, kräftig sich zeigen, rufet die Arme der Götter hierbei. All powers are granted to souls undaunted, when self-reliant, firm, and defiant, then shall the gods be helpful to thee. Page 593. They abused these words as they abused all words, all the finest ideas and feelings of the German people, turning them into tools to build their own pathetically inadequate ideology. I would not have been surprised to find the ghost of Goethe standing beside me, ready to take revenge on those who so badly misused his work. Now Goebbels stepped forward to light two huge red candles on either side of the altar. I could sense Von Beck beside me, barely restraining himself from lunging at these creatures. In silence, I held him back. We had to wait. We had to see what would be revealed to us. Sepiris had wanted us to come here. He had sent the hare to lead us here. We must wait for the ritual to proceed. I was astonished how banal their own words were, full of entreaties to ancient gods, to Wotan and the spirits of oak and iron and fire. The light from the candles illuminated their faces. Goebbels, a mask of twisted, rat-like glee, like a bad schoolboy relishing his own wickedness. Göring, plump and serious, plainly believing everything he said, and, moreover, evidently drunk or drugged into near oblivion. And Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of the Third Reich, his eyes dark mirrors, his pale face full of an unwholesome luminosity, willing all this to become reality as, no doubt, he sought to will the rest of the world into acceptance of his hideous insanity. It was a powerful scene, and one which I hope never to witness again. This was human perversity which had little to do with even the worst examples found amongst the followers of chaos. This was so much closer to my own experience, my own time, that I could sympathize with Von Beck, who struggled with himself like a chained dog who seeks only to kill, who had seen at first hand the horrors this trio had brought to his nation, whose whole original purpose in linking his fate with mine was concerned with destroying them. of saving his world from their evil. Page 594. I looked at Alizard. Even she sensed the ugly power of these creatures. Let the powers of our ancient tribal gods, the gods who lent strength to the conquerors of Rome, be granted to our Germany in these the hours of her destiny, the hours of decision. This was Goebbels, plainly not really believing what he was saying, but well aware that both Hitler and Göring were by no means as incredulous. Let us be granted the mystical might of the great gods of the old world, filling us with that dark natural energy which defeated the enfeebled followers of the Judeo-Christian would-be conquerors of our ancient land. Let our blood, which is the pure, undiluted blood of those fearless ancestors, flow again through our veins with the same sweet thrill it knew in the days before our honest, guiltless forebears were corrupted by alien, Oriental religions. Let Germany know a return to her full, untrammeled selfhood. More of this nonsense followed, with von Beck growing increasingly restless and Alizard and I becoming gradually bored and impatient. Now we summon the chalice, the vessel of our spiritual essence, the chalice which is that same cauldron Parsifal's salt, the chalice of wisdom, which the Christians stole from us and incorporated into their own mythologies, calling it the Holy Grail. Goebbels chanted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, fidgeting like some malformed dwarf. Now we summon our chalice so that we might partake of its contents and be filled with the wisdom we seek. These words were echoed now by Hitler and Göring. Now we kneel, cried Goebbels, evidently relishing every moment of his power over the others. Obediently, the two Nazi leaders went down on their knees, leaving only Goebbels standing, his arms spread as he addressed the altar. Here in this most ancient of all places, where the chalice has resided since the beginning of time, let us be granted a vision. Let us drink that wisdom. Let us be granted the power of our old gods, the knowledge of our old blood, the certainty of our old strength. We must know which way to go. We must know if we are to concentrate our forces on releasing the power of the atom or upon conquering the threat from the east. We must have a sign, great gods. We must have a sign. Page 595. I shall never know if Goebbels was merely putting on a theatrical act for his less sceptical comrades, or if he actually believed the rubbish which fell from his thin lips. I do not know if his incantatory speeches had any part in what occurred next, or if von Beck's presence in the vault was the cause of the phenomenon. His family was associated with the Grail, just as I, in all my guises, was associated with the sword. And that perhaps is why fate had drawn us together, since it was a great and important fight we presently fought. How much of a role Seppieris played, and how much he knew, I still do not know, but it is obvious his powers of perception and prediction had been used to ensure that we would be in that exact place at that exact time. For now there began a phase of the ritual which, I could tell, took all three by surprise, most of all Goebbels. We heard the sweetest music fill the vault. A scent like roses accompanied it. The music was almost choral. It was in direct contrast to the dark heaviness of our surroundings, to the pagan paraphernalia of the Nazi hierarchy. And then came a white and blinding light, a light of such loveliness that we could after a moment stare into it without suffering. For at the centre of that white light, the source of the music and the perfume was a simple chalice, a golden bowl, the like of which I had seen only once before. This is what Christian legends called the Holy Grail, and what the Celts had called the Cauldron of Wisdom. It had existed for all time, under many names, just as the sword we sought had existed, just as I, the eternal champion, had existed. Beyond the radiance I perceived Goebbels, and Hitler, and Göring, all upon their knees now, looking in utter astonishment at the unexpected vision. Page 596. I heard Hitler muttering over and over again some mindless oath. Göring seemed to be hiccuping and trying to raise his fat body to its feet. Goebbels had begun to grin, again like an evil schoolboy who'd made a wild discovery. He was almost laughing. "It's true, Goebbels screamed now, addressing himself, his own doubts. "It's true. We have a sign. What shall we do? Must we dispose of the threat from the east before we concentrate our forces on building an atomic bomb, or should we attempt to consolidate our gains while putting our energies at the disposal of our scientists? How long can it be before Russia attacks us, or America and England invade us? What shall we do? Our conquests came so rapidly we are hardly able to think. We need guidance. Are you truly a sign from the old gods? Will they truly direct us on to the right path to ensure Germany's dominance of the world?" "The cup cannot speak to us, Herr Doctor." Adolf Hitler was suddenly contemptuous, sensing his minister's uncertainty in the face of this actuality. "It must be held. Then the truth will be revealed. Surely that is what it means." No. Göring finally lumbered to his feet, panting heavily. His eyes were red, his nose ran, and the thin lines of spittle fell from his lips. He drew a great shuddering breath. "There is a maiden, surely, a maiden who guards the Grail, a Rhine maiden, eh? I know, from Wagner, eh?" And he giggled. I could scarcely believe that these were the men who had done so much to influence the course of my own world's history. It now seemed obvious that all of them were drugged in some way. They were acting like silly children, and yet I suppose I should have realized that it is the nature of all such creatures to be at heart infantile. Only children believe that they can achieve enormous power over the world without paying a price for that power, and the price so often is the sanity of the one who seeks it. In a way, these three men were even more like grotesque caricatures of the people they had once been than those poor distorted things of chaos who had pursued us earlier. Did they realize it? And did that realization actually further their willingness towards their own corruption and descent into utter madness? Page 597. "Yes," said Adolf Hitler, with a display of almost ridiculous self-importance. "Rhine maidens, Valkyries, Wotan himself. This chalice merely signifies their presence." This ludicrous debate continued for a few moments. I believe they had never wanted this vision. The rituals they performed were a kind of reinforcement of their need to believe in the rightness of their actions. This vault in the depths of the Nuremberg castle, the robes, the incantations, were all a means of revivifying their flagging, drug-dependent energies, a way of making themselves believe in their mystical dynasty. And now it dawned on me that the Grail had not appeared in answer to Dr. Goebbels' summoning. It appeared because we were there, or specifically, I guessed, because von Beck was there. I looked at my friend. His face was rapt as he gazed upon the Grail. Plainly it had not occurred to him that the Golden Cup had a special affinity with him, in spite of his family's legends. Now Hitler stepped forward, his strange little face suddenly sober as he stretched shaking hands towards the Grail. The radiance from the cup emphasized the horrible pallor of his skin, the unhealthiness of his appearance. I could not believe that such a corrupted being would be allowed even to look upon the Grail, let alone touch it. Those clutching fingers, which already had the blood of millions upon them, reached towards the singing cup. The eyes reflected the glow, glittering like little stones. The moist lips parted. The features twitched. You'll realize, my friends, that this is the source of energy we seek. This is the power which will allow us to defeat every enemy. The Jews, as usual, look in the wrong direction for the means of creating an atomic bomb. We have found it here in Nuremberg. We have found it at the very core of our spiritual stronghold. Here is energy to destroy the entire globe or to build it again in any image we desire. How paltry is the thing they call science. We have something far superior. We have faith. We have a force greater than reason. We have a wisdom beyond mere knowledge. We have the Holy Grail itself, the chalice of limitless power. And his hands seemed like black claws, reaching into that pure light, reaching towards the Grail, about to despoil something of such wonderful holiness I felt sick at the very thought. Page 598. But now the cup was singing louder. It was almost shrieking its alarm at Hitler's intention. The note changed to one seemingly of warning, yet still the dictator made to grasp it. His fingers touched the glowing gold. And Adolf Hitler's shriek was louder than the cups. He fell backwards. He sobbed. He stared at his fingers. They gleamed black, as if the skin had been fused to the bone. Then, like a little child, he put the fingers into his mouth and sat down suddenly on the flagstones of that ancient vault. Goebbels frowned. He reached out, but more cautiously. Again the Grail sounded its warning. Göring was already retreating, covering his face with his arms, screaming, "No, no, I am not your enemy." In tones of placatory reasonableness, Joseph Goebbels said, "It was not our intention to violate this thing. We merely sought its wisdom." He was frightened. He looked around him as if he sought a means of escape, as if he had grown appalled at whatever it was he had accidentally brought there. Meanwhile his master remained upon the floor, sucking his fingers, staring thoughtfully at the Grail, and from time to time murmuring something to himself. Afraid that the cup would now disappear as readily as it had appeared, I reached forward to grasp it. In the light I understood suddenly that they could see me. Hitler in particular had focused on me and was shading his eyes to try to get a clearer view of me. I thought better of taking the cup. I said to von Beck, "Quickly, man, I am certain that only you will be able to set hands upon it. Take it. It is our key to the dragon's sword. Take it, von Beck." Page 599. The three Nazis were advancing again, perhaps fascinated by the shadowy figures they saw, still not absolutely certain that what they observed was real. Now Elisard stepped between them and the Grail, raising her hand. "No further," she cried. "This cup is not yours. It is ours. It is needed to save the six realms from chaos." She spoke to them reasonably, having no knowledge of what they represented. Plainly Hermann Göring at least believed he had seen his Rhine men. Hitler, however, was shaking his head as if trying to rid it of a hallucination, while Goebbels merely grinned, perhaps convinced and fascinated by his own insanity. "Listen," Göring cried. "Do you recognize it? She's speaking the old High German. We have summoned an entire pantheon." Hitler seemed to be biting his lower lip, trying to come to a decision. He looked from us to his fingers and back again. "What shall I do?" he said. Alizard could not understand him. She pointed toward the door. "Go! Go! This cup is ours. It is what we came here for." "I would swear it is High German," said Goring again, but it was plain he could understand her hardly any better than she could understand him. "She is trying to tell us the correct decision. She is pointing to the east." "Take the cup, man," I said urgently to von Beck. I had no idea what would happen to us if we remained much longer. The Nazis were not stable. If they fled from the room and locked the door behind them, we would be thoroughly trapped. It was even possible we would die in that vault before they dared open it up again. Von Beck responded to my cries at last. Very slowly, he reached out his hands towards that beautiful chalice, and the thing seemed to settle into his palms as if it had always been his. The voice grew sweeter still, the radiance subtler, the perfume stronger. Page 600. Von Beck's own features were illuminated by the chalice. He looked at once heroic and pure, exactly as the true knights of the Arthurian legends might have seemed to those who accompanied them on their quest for the Grail. I led both him and Alizard past the uncertain Nazis and towards the door of the vault. We took the chalice with us. They did not attempt to stop us, yet they were not sure whether to remain or to follow us. I spoke to them as I would speak to a dog. "Stay," I said. "Stay here." Alizard drew back the bolt. "Yes," Goring murmured. "We have our sign." "But the Grail," said Hitler. "It is to be the source of our power." "We shall find it again," Goebbels reassured him. He spoke dreamily. It seemed to me that the last thing he wanted to do was to set eyes on either the Holy Grail or ourselves ever again. We had threatened the strange power he had over his fellow Nazis, especially over his master Hitler. Of the three men in that vault, only Goebbels was truly glad to see us go. We closed the door behind us. We would have locked it if we could. "Now," I said, "we must return as quickly as possible to the room we were first in. I suspect that is the way back to chaos." As if entranced, von Beck continued to hold the cup in his two hands, moving with us, though his attention remained fixed on the Grail. Alizard looked at him with a lover's eyes, holding him gently by the arm. And now, when SS men approached us, they fell back, blinded. We reached our destination without difficulty. I turned the handle of the door, and it opened onto blackness. Cautiously, I entered. Then Alizard followed, leading von Beck, whose eyes had never left the Grail. An expression of rapt sweetness was on his handsome face. For some unknown reason, I was faintly disturbed by it. Then Alizard had closed the door, and the Grail's radiance filled the room. We were all dark shadows in that light. Page 601. Yet now I counted 3 such shadows beside my own. The smallest of these now drew its little body closer to mine. He grinned up at me and saluted. Germaise the Crooked no longer wore his marsh armour. Instead, he was clad in more familiar motley. "I note that you've lately experienced what's common for me," he bowed, "and know the power as well as the frustrations of being a ghost." I took his offered hand. "Why are you here, Germaise? Do you bring news of the Maschenheim?" "I am presently in the service of law. I bring a message from Seppirus." His face clouded. He added slowly, "And news from the Maschenheim. News of defeat." "Adelstein?" Alizard came forward, pushing loose hair away from her lovely features. "Has Adelstein fallen?" "Not yet," said the dwarf gravely, but my Shanheim is completely reduced. The survivors, too, have rallied to the Ursine stronghold. But now Sharadim sends even the great hulls through the pillars of paradise in pursuit of them. No realm is free of invasion. Each is violated. In Rutenshim the Red Weepers are enslaved, swearing loyalty to Chaos, or they are slain. This, too, is true of Flogenshim and, of course, Drakenshim. Only Sharadim's forces occupy Gistenheim now. All humans are defeated. The Eldrin and the Ursine princes continue to resist, but they cannot hold Adelstein much longer. I fear I have just come from there. The Lady Falizon, Prince Mirandi Pag, and Prince Grofer Rome send you messages of goodwill and pray for your success. If Sharadim or her creature reaches the dragon sword ahead of you, it cannot be long before chaos breaks through and Adelstein is engulfed. Moreover, the Eldrin women will never be reunited with the rest of their race. I was horrified. But do you know anything of Sharadim and her dead brother? Page 602. I've heard nothing, save that they returned to Chaos on unfinished business. Then we must try to return to Chaos also, I said. We have the cup Sepiros told us of. Now we seek the Horned Horse. But how can we get back to Chaos, Jermes? Can you say? You are here, said Jermes the Crooked in some surprise, and opening the door he revealed daylight, a rich exotic smell, dark fleshy leaves, and a trail which disappeared into what was apparently a tropical forest. And when we had passed through the archway, Jermes had gone, together with the door and any sign of the Nuremberg dungeons. It was at this point that von Beck lowered the chalice, an expression of dismay on his face. I have failed. I have failed. Oh, why did you let me leave? What is it? Cried Alizard in surprise. What is the matter, my dear? I had the opportunity to kill them. I did not take it. Do you think you could have killed them in the presence of this cup? I asked him reasonably, aside from the fact that you had no weapon. He calmed a little. But it was my single opportunity to destroy them, to save millions. I surely will not be given a second chance. You have achieved your ambition, I told him. But you have achieved it obliquely, according to the methods of the balance. I can promise you that now they will destroy themselves, thanks to what happened in that vault today. Believe me, von Beck, they are now as thoroughly doomed as any of their victims. Is this truth? He looked from me to the chalice. The golden cup no longer glowed. But, although it was plain, it still possessed enormous power. It is the truth, I swear. I did not know you possessed the power of prediction, Herr Dacre. In this case, I do. They can last only a short while longer. Then all three will die by their own hands, and their tyranny will collapse. Page 603. Germany and the world will be free of them. Free of their particular evil, I promise you, free of everything save the memory of their cruelty and barbarism. He drew a great sobbing breath. I believe you. Then Sepiris kept his word to me. He kept his word in his usual way, I said, by ensuring that your ambition and his own coincided, by gaining something which serves his own mysterious ends and which in turn serves ours. All our actions are linked, all our destinies have something in common. An action taken in one plane of the multiverse can achieve a result in quite a different plane, perhaps millennia, and who knows what kind of distance apart. Seppurus plays the game of the balance, a series of checks, adjustments, fresh moves, all designed to maintain ultimate equilibrium. He is only one such servant of the balance. There are several, to my knowledge, moving here and there through all the myriad planes and cycles of the multiverse. Ultimately, we cannot any of us know the full pattern or detect a true beginning or an end. There are cycles within cycles, patterns within patterns. Perhaps it is finite, but it seems infinite to us mortals, and I doubt if even Seppurus sees the whole game. He merely does what he can to ensure that neither law nor chaos can achieve a complete advantage. "And what of the lords of the higher worlds?" asked Alizard, who already knew something of this. "Can they perceive the entire scheme?" "I doubt it," I said. "Their vision is perhaps in some sense even more limited than our own. Frequently it is the pawn who perceives more than the king or queen, by virtue of having less at stake. Perhaps." Von Beck shook his head. Quietly he murmured, "And I wonder if there will ever be a time when all those gods and goddesses and demigods will cease their warring, will cease to exist, perhaps." "There may be such periods in the cyclic histories of the myriad realms," I said. "There could be an end to all this, when the lords of the higher worlds and all the machinery of cosmic mystery shall be no more." Page 604. "And perhaps that is why they fear mortals so much. The secret of their destruction, I suspect, lies in us, though we have yet to realize our own power." "And do you have a hint of what that power may be, Eternal Champion?" said Alizard. I smiled. "I think it is simply the power to conceive of a multiverse which has no need of the supernatural, which indeed could abolish it, if so desired." And at that point the jungle heaved once, turning itself into a flowing ocean of molten glass, which somehow did not burn us. Von Beck yelled and lost his footing, keeping hold of the chalice. Alizard grabbed him and tried to help him up. A noisy wind was blowing. I made my way to my companions. Von Beck was up again. "Use the Actorius," I cried to Alizard, who still had the stone in her keeping. "Find the shadow path again." But even as she reached into her purse to find the stone, the Grail had begun to sing. It was a different note to the one we had first heard. It was softer, calmer, yet it held an astonishing authority. And the glassy undulations slowly subsided. The smooth hills of obsidian grew quite still, and we could see a path leading through them. Beyond the path was a sandy beach. Holding the chalice before him, Von Beck led us towards that shore. Here was a force I realized far stronger than the Actorius, a force for order and equilibrium, able to exert enormous power upon its surroundings. It dawned on me that much of what had happened up until now had been engineered by Seppurus and his kind. I had already seen that Von Beck had an affinity with the Grail the way that I had a similar affinity with the sword. Von Beck had been needed to find the Grail, and now he was bringing it into this realm, close to the place called the world's beginning. Was there significance in this action? We had reached the shore. Above us were grassy dunes, and beyond that an horizon. We tramped up to the dunes and stood looking out over a plain which appeared to be without end. Page 605. It stretched ahead of us, an infinity of waving grasses and wild flowers, without a tree or a hill to break the flatness. There was a subtle scent all around us, and when we turned, the ocean of glass had gone. Now the plain stretched away in that direction also. I saw a man approaching us. He strode with a leisurely gait through the tall grass. The light wind tugged at his robes. He wore black and silver. I thought for one wild moment that Hitler or one of his henchmen had followed us into this realm. But then I recognized the grey hair, the patriarchal features. It was the Archduke Balazirov. Almost as soon as I noticed him, he stopped, raising his hand in greeting. "I will not advance much closer, if you'll forgive me, mortals. That object you carry is inimical to my particular constitution." He smiled almost in self-mockery. "And I must admit I do not welcome its presence in my realm. I have come to strike a bargain with you, if you'll listen." "I make no bargains with chaos," I told him. "Surely you understand that." He chuckled. "Oh, champion, how poorly you understand your own nature. There have been times, and there will be others, when you know loyalty only to chaos." I refused to be drawn. Obstinately, I said, "Well, Archduke Balazirov, I can assure you that I possess no such loyalty at this moment. I am my own creature, as best I can be." "You were always that, champion, no matter what side you seem to serve. That is the secret of your survival, I suspect. Believe me, I have nothing but admiration." He coughed, as if he had caught himself in a moment of discourtesy. "I respect all you say, Sir Champion, but I am offering you the chance to alter the destiny of at least a full cycle of the multiverse. To change your own destiny, to save yourself, perhaps, from all the agony you have already known. I assure you, if you pursue this present course, it will bring you further pain, further remorse." Page 606. "I have been told it will bring me at least some peace and the possibility of being with Amizad again." I spoke firmly. I resisted his arguments, for all their apparent sense and certainty. "A respite, nothing more. Serve me, and you will possess almost everything you desire, immediately. Amizad, one so like her you would come to forget any difference. One even more beautiful, adoring you as no man has been adored before." I laughed at him then, to his evident surprise. "You are truly a lord of chaos, Archduke Balazirov. You have no real imagination. You believe that all a mortal seeks is the same power as you possess. I loved an individual in her complexity. I have come to understand it even more since I have suffered the delusions this place imposes upon the human brain. If I cannot know again the woman I loved, I want no substitute. What do I care if I am adored by her or not? I love her for herself. My imagination delights not in control of her, but in the fact that she exists. I had no part in her existence. I merely celebrate it, and I would celebrate it for eternity, though I be parted from her for eternity. And if I am reunited, even for a brief while, that is more than justification for the agony I suffer. You have stated more concisely than I what chaos stands for, Lord Archduke, and why I resist you." Balazirov shrugged and seemed to accept my statement in good humour. "Then perhaps there is something else you would want from me. All I ask is that you take up the dragon's sword in my name. The Eldrin women are virtually finished. Sharadim and Flamadin rule the 6 realms of the wheel. If you serve me in this one small thing, so that I may consolidate this little fragment of the multiverse under my control, then I will do everything I can to return you to your Amizad. The game is over here, Sir Champion. We have won. What more can you do? Now you have the opportunity to serve yourself. Surely you cannot wish to be fate's fool forever? Page 607. The temptation was great, and yet I had little difficulty resisting him the moment I looked at Alizard's desperate face. It was from loyalty to the Eldrin that I fought, that I played this turn of the game. If I denied that loyalty, then I denied all right to being united again with the woman I loved. So I shook my head, saying instead to Count Ulrich von Beck, "My friend, would you be so good as to take the chalice a little nearer to the Archduke, so that he may inspect it?" And with a shriek, a ferocious, malevolent, and terrific noise which denied all the sweet reason of his earlier tone, the Archduke Balazirthaff fell backwards, his very substance beginning to change as von Beck approached him. His flesh seemed to boil and transmogrify on his bones. In a matter of moments he revealed 1,000 different faces, very few of them even remotely human. And then he had gone. I fell to my knees, shuddering and weeping. Only then did I realize what I had been resisting, how much I had been tempted by his invitation and his promises. My strength had gone out of me. My friends helped me up. The cool wind flowed through the grass, and it seemed to me that this was not a production of chaos at all. This was, temporarily at least, the result of the Grail's influence. Once more I was impressed by the cup's power to bring order even to the heart of chaos. Alizard was speaking softly to me. "It is here," she said. "The horned horse is here." Trotting towards us through the grass, its head lifted as it uttered a whinny of greeting, came a beast whose coat flashed sometimes silver, sometimes gold. From its forehead there grew a single horn. Like the Grail, it bore a strong resemblance to something from my familiar earthly mythology. Alizard was smiling in delight as the beast came up to her and nuzzled her hand. From behind us a voice came. It was a familiar voice, but it was not the voice of the Archduke Balazirthaff. "I will take the cup now," it said. Page 608. Sepiris stood there. There was something in his eyes which suggested pain. He reached out his great black hand to von Beck. "The cup, if you will." Von Beck was reluctant. "It is mine," he said. Sepiris displayed a rare flash of anger. "That cup belongs to nobody," he murmured. "That cup is its own thing. It is a singular object of power. All who attempt to own it are corrupted by their folly and their greed. I had not expected you to say such a thing, Count von Beck." Chastened, von Beck bowed his head. "Forgive me. Erekose says that you made it possible for me to initiate the self-destruction of the Nazis. That is so. It is now woven into the pattern of their destiny. By your courageous actions here, and by what occurred when you sought out the Grail, you have achieved much for your own people, von Beck, I can assure you." And with a great sigh, von Beck handed Sepiris the Grail. "I thank you, sir. Then what I meant to accomplish is done. Aye, if you wish, you can return to your own plane and your own time. You have no obligation to me." But von Beck looked tenderly at Alizard, and he smiled at me. "I think I will stay to see this thing through, win or lose. I have a mind to see how this particular phase of your game ends, Lord Sepiris." Sepiris seemed pleased with this. though his eyes still spoke of some secret fear. "Then you must follow this horse," he said. "It will lead you to the dragon sword. The forces of evil are gathering even greater strength now. It will not be long before the realms of the wheel collapse completely, reduced to the stuff of chaos. For this particular realm is stabilized to the extent that it is stable at all by those which surround it. If they are consumed, then pure chaos will be the result, a mass of horrifying obscenity at which these nightmare marches merely hint. Nothing will survive in anything like its previous form, and you will be trapped within it forever prey to the whims of a Balazirsav 1,000 times more powerful than he is at present." He paused, drawing in a great breath. "Do you still elect to remain here, Count von Beck?" Page 609.
"Naturally," said my friend, with characteristic and almost comical aristocratic aplomb.
"There are still a few Germans in the world who understand the nature of good and evil where their duty lies." "So be it," said Seppirus. He folded the chalice into his robe and was gone. Not knowing what we must face when we got there, we followed the unicorn. Already the influence of the grail was fading. The grass first turned a peculiar shade of yellow, then of orange, then of red. The unicorn now waded across a shallow lake of blood. Waist deep in this, and shivering with horror, we pressed on. It was as if we walked through the blood of all those who had died thus far in service of Sharadim's lust for a perverse and immortal power. Chapter 3. That horrible lake stretched in all directions, filling all our horizons. Save for the unicorn leading the way, and the three of us, there were no other occupants, it seemed, in the entire realm of chaos. For some reason I could not rid my mind of the idea that we were indeed wading through the blood of countless murdered souls. It seemed to me, as time went on, that perhaps this was not blood shed by Sharadim or the Lords of Chaos. It could as easily be the blood which I had spilled as the eternal champion. I had slaughtered humanity. I had been responsible for the deaths of so many others. In all my myriad guises, I felt that even this vast plain of blood was only a fraction of it. Again my two friends had linked arms like lovers. I was slightly ahead of them, still following the unicorn. I began to see reflections in the red liquid. I saw my face as John Dacre, as Erekose, as Erlich's Castle, as Clen of Clengar, and the action of that cool wind seemed to bring words with it. "You are Elric, whom they shall call Woman-Slayer, Elric who betrayed his race, just as Erekose betrayed his race. You are Coram, killed by a Mabdan woman whom you loved. Remember Zarosinia, remember Mebdullah, remember all those you betrayed and who betrayed you, remember all the battles you fought. Remember Count Brass and Giselda. You are the eternal champion, eternally doomed to fight in all mankind's wars, and in all the Eldrin's wars, just and unjust. What meaningless actions are yours? The noble become the ignoble, the impure become the pure, all is malleable, all changes, nothing remains constant in the schemes of man or gods. Yet you go down the eons, through plane after plane of existence, allowing yourself to be used as a pawn in a pointless cosmic gain. Page 611. No, I told myself. There is a point to it. I must do positive penance in my remorse. I must redeem myself, and in that redemption I shall discover peace, and in peace, at last, I shall find my Amizad. I shall know some small freedom. You are goddess Valabassian, conqueror of the distant suns, and you have no need of anyone. I am the eternal champion, bound by cosmic chains to a duty still undone. You are Moorcock, Sebt O'Reilly, gunholder of the Key Law's venturers. You are Alivale and you are Artos. You are Dorian, Jeremiah, Asquinal, Goldberg, Frannick, and the list of names went on and on and on. They rang in my ears like bells, they beat in my head like drums, they clashed like weapons of war filling my eyes with blood. A million faces assailed me, a million murdered creatures. You are the eternal champion, doomed always to fight, never to rest. There is no end to the battle. Law and chaos are relentless enemies. There can never be reconciliation. The balance demands too much of you, champion. You grow weak in its service. I have no choice. It is what I am destined to do, and all of us must fulfill our destinies. There can be no choice. No choice. You can choose whom you fight for. You can rebel against that destiny. You can alter it. But I cannot abolish it. I am the eternal champion, and I have no doom save this doom, no life save this life, no pain save this pain. Oh, Amizad, my Amizad. The rhythm of my wading legs seemed to be the same as the rhythm of the words in my head. I was speaking aloud now. I am the eternal champion. I pursue a cosmic doom. I am the eternal champion, and my destiny is set for me. My destiny is war and death. My destiny is fear. Page 612. The voice which spoke to me was my own voice. The voice which answered me was my own voice. There were tears streaming from my eyes, but I brushed them aside. I waded on. I waded through that terrible lake of blood. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I shook it off. I am the eternal champion. I have no life save that. I have no means to alter what I am. I am the champion. I am the hero of 1,000 worlds, and yet I have no true name of my own. Dacre, man, what is happening to you? Why are you mumbling so? It was Von Beck's voice, distant and agitated. I am pursued by destiny. I am the toy of fate. The Chaos Lord spoke truth in that. Yet I shall not weaken. I shall not serve his cause. I am the eternal champion. My remorse is complete. My guilt is so great. My doom is already set. Dacre, take hold of yourself.
But I was lost in my monomaniacal self-absorption.
I could think of nothing but the dreadful irony of my predicament. I was a demigod in the 6 realms, a legendary hero throughout the multiverse, a noble myth to millions. Yet all I knew was sadness and terror. My godman, you are going thoroughly mad. Listen to me. Without you, Alizard and I are completely lost. We have no means of knowing where we are or what we are supposed to do. The unicorn leads us to the sword, which only you among us can bear, just as only I could take hold of the grail. But the war drums continued to sound in my ears. My mind was filled with the clash of metal. My heart was consumed by melancholy at my own dreadful fate. Von Beck's voice broke in again. "Remember who you are, man. Remember what you are doing, Herr Dacre." I saw only blood ahead of me, blood behind me, blood on every side. "Herr Dacre, John, I am Erekose, who slew the human race. I am Erlich Skarsal, who fought against Belfig. I am Elric of Valnidobone, and I shall be so many others." Page 613. No man, remember who you really are. There was a time you told me about. A time when you had no memories of being the champion. Was that some kind of beginning for you? Why are you still called John Dacre? That is your first identity. Before you were called, before they named you champion. Ah, how many long cycles of the multiverse have passed since then. John Dacre, pull yourself together, for all our sakes. Von Beck was yelling, but his voice sounded still very far away. You are the champion who bears the black blade. You are the champion, hero of the 1,000-mile line. The blood was lapping about my chest. Somehow I was sinking deeper and deeper into it. I was about to drown in all that blood I had spilled. Herr Dacre, come back to us. Come back to yourself. I could no longer be sure of any identity. I had so many. And yet, were they all the same? What a poor, unfulfilled life it was to fight so. I had never wanted to fight. I had never known the sword until King Rizhnov called me as defender of humanity. The blood was at my chin. I grinned. Why should I care? It was only fitting. A cold, small voice spoke to me. John Dacre, this will be your only real betrayal if you betray that identity, that which is truly yourself. It was Von Beck speaking again. I shrugged him off. You will die, I heard him say, not because of your human weakness, but because of your inhuman strength. Forget that you were the eternal champion. Remember your ordinary mortality. The blood lapped against my lips. I began to laugh. See, I drown in this concrete reminder of my own guilt. Then you are a fool, Herr Dacre. We were wrong to trust you as a friend. And so were the Eldrin women. And so were the Ursine princes, and so was Ermizad foolish to trust you as a lover. It was John Dacre she loved, not Erekose, the monstrous tool of fortune. Page 614. The blood was in my mouth. I began to spit it out. I rose gasping. I'd been on my knees. The level of the lake had not risen. It was I who had fallen. I stood up, staring blankly for a moment at Count von Beck and Alizard. They were holding me, shaking me. You are John Dacre, I heard him say again. It was John Dacre whom she loved, not that relentless sword-swinger. I coughed. I could still hardly understand him, but then gradually it dawned on me that what he said had meaning, and as the meaning grew clearer, I thought perhaps he spoke the truth. Ermizad loved Erekose, I said. She might have called you that, for that was the name King Rishnov gave you, but the one she really loved was John Dacre, the ordinary decent mortal who was caught up in a web of hatred and appalling destiny. You cannot change what happened to you, but you can change what you have become, John Dacre. Don't you see that? You can change what you have become. It seemed to me at that moment these were the wisest words I had heard for many a year. I wiped the liquid from my face. It was not blood at all. I shook the drops from my eyes, from my hands. Ahead of us, the unicorn waited patiently. I realized that once again I had lost my grip on reality. But now it was clear I had somehow lost a little of my real identity in all my cosmic adventurings. I had been discontented as John Dacre. My world had seemed grey to me, but in some ways it had been richer than all the wild, fantastical spheres I had visited. I reached out and shook Von Beck by the hand. I was smiling at him. "Thank you, my friend. You are the best comrade, I think, that I have ever had." He too was smiling. The three of us stood there in that crimson lake, and we hugged one another, while overhead the sky began to boil and smoulder and turn an angry red as the waters below. Page 615. Then it seemed to us that the ocean of blood rose up to meet the falling sky, forming a single vast wall of glittering crimson crystal. We looked around us for the unicorn, but it had vanished. Now ahead was nothing but the vast crimson cliff. And then I remembered the vision we had been shown at Morandi Pag's, and staring into that wall I saw it embedded there, like an insect in amber, a green-black blade in which a tiny fragment of yellow flickered. "There it is," I said. "There is the dragon's sword." My friends were silent. It was only then that I realized the liquid had solidified completely. Our legs were as perfectly set in crystalline rock as was the sword. We were trapped. I heard the sound of hoofbeats. The rock in which my legs were encased trembled as the horses grew closer. Twisting my body round, I looked over my shoulder. Two figures rode towards us on identical horses, on bright black horses. They were dressed in gaudy finery, matching surcoats and cloaks, matching swords and banners, and one was Sharadim, Empress of the Six Realms, and the other was her dead brother Flamadin, who sought to drink my soul and make it his own. Now, standing at the base of the great red cliff, the Archduke Balarisaf, again in the guise of a sober patrician, folded his arms and waited. He was smiling. He disdained to look at me. He called instead to Sharadim and Flamadin. "Greetings, sweet servants. I have kept my promise to you. Here are 3 little morsels, stuck like flies on a paper, for you to do with as you will." Flamadin threw back his gaunt grey head, and a hollow laugh escaped it. His voice was, if anything, more lifeless than when I had last heard it on the edge of the volcano in Rutenshim. "At last I shall be complete again, and I have learned to be wise. I have learned that it is folly to serve any master save chaos." I looked for a sign of real intelligence in that poor dead face. I saw nothing. Page 616. Yet I still felt that I looked into my own features. It was almost as if Flamadin were a parody, reminding me what I, as the eternal champion, was in danger of becoming. I felt sorry for the creature, but at the same time I was deeply afraid. The two slowed their horses and advanced towards us at a walk. Sheridan looked at Alizard, and she smirked. "Have you heard, my dear? The Eldrin women are driven from their own realm. They hide like rats in the warrens of the old bear folk." Alizard looked back at her with a firm eye. "That news was offered by your lackey Armiad. When I last saw him, he had grown to resemble the pig he always was. Do I detect a similar coarsening in your own features, my lady? How long can it be before your affinities with chaos begin to show?" Sheridan glared and urged her horse on. Von Beck smiled at Alizard. Plainly, she had struck a good blow. He said nothing, merely ignoring the two riders as best he could. Sheridan snorted and rode towards me. "Greetings, Sir Champion," she said. "What a world of deception it is. But then, you would know that best of all, since you posed as my brother, Flamadin. Do you know they already have a legend in the Six Realms amongst those few who remain unkilled or uncaptured? They think Flamadin, the old Flamadin of the stories, will return to help them against me. But Flamadin is now at last at one with his sister. We are married, had you heard? And we rule as equals." She smiled. It was a dreadful, and it was an evil smile. Like Von Beck, I chose to ignore her. She rode up to the crystal wall, and she peered into the rock. She licked her lips. "That sword shall soon be ours," she said. "Are you looking forward to holding it in your two hands, brother?" "My two hands," said Flamadin. His eyes were empty. He was staring upwards at nothing. "My two hands." "He is hungry," Sheridan said in pseudo-apology. "He is deeply hungry. You see, he lacks his soul." And she looked with vicious, smiling cruelty directly into my eyes. Page 617. I felt as if knives had been driven into my sockets, yet I forced myself to stare back at her. I thought, I am John Dacre. I was born in London in 1941 during an air raid. My mother's name was Helen. My father's name was Paul. I had no brothers, no sisters. I went to school, but I could not remember where I went to school first. I tried to think. I had an image of a white suburban road. We had moved after the Blitz to South London, as I recalled, to Norwood, was it? But the school? What was the school's name? Sheridan was puzzled. Perhaps she could tell that my mind was elsewhere. Perhaps she was afraid I had some hidden power, some means of escape. She said, "I suppose we need waste no more time, Lord Balazirzaf?" "Your creature," he said. "It must contain the champion's essence, if only for a short time. Failing that, Sheridan, you must keep your word to me, and take the sword yourself. That was your bargain." "And your bargain, my lord, should I be successful?" For a little while at least she had some kind of power over this god. "Why, that you should be elevated into the pantheon of chaos, to become one of the great sword rulers, replacing one who has been banished." Balazirzaf looked at me, as if he regretted my failure to accept his offer. It was obvious he would prefer me to do what was needed. "You are a powerful enemy," he said reminiscently, "in any guise. Do you remember, Lord Coram, how you fought my brothers and my sisters? Do you remember your great war against the gods?" "I was not Coram. I was John Dacre. I refused all other identities." "You have forgotten my name, I believe, my lord," I said. "I am John Dacre." He shrugged. "Does it matter what name you choose, Sir Champion? You could have ruled the universe by any of your many, many names." "I have only one," I said. Page 618. This forced him to hesitate. Sheridan, too, had become curious as to my meaning. Thanks to my recent experiences and the help of my friends, I was able to speak with authority. I was determined to consider myself a single individual and an ordinary mortal. I felt it was the key to my own salvation and that of those I loved. I looked into Balariusav's eyes, and I peered into the abyss. I turned my gaze from him to Sheridan, and I saw in her face the same emptiness which possessed the Lord of Chaos. Flamadin's poor blank stare was as nothing compared to what I beheld in their faces. "You will not deny, I hope, that you are the eternal champion?" said Sheridan sardonically. "For we know that you are." "I am only John Dacre," I said. "He is John Dacre," said Von Beck. "From London. That is a city in England. I do not know what part of the multiverse, I fear. Perhaps you would be able to discover that, Lady Sheridan." He was reinforcing me, and I was grateful to him. "This is a nonsensical pastime," Sheridan said, dismounting from her horse. "Flamadin must feed. Then he must take the sword. Then he can strike the blow which will set chaos free from the 6 realms." "Should you not wait, my lady," said Von Beck coolly, "so that your retainers should witness this? You promised them a spectacle, as I recall." "Those cattle?" She was dismissive. She grinned as she directed her remarks at Alizard. "They prove themselves useless here. I have thrown them against Adelstein. There they are happy, running at the walls. Soon those who survive will be having their way with your kinswomen. Now, Flamadin dear, dead brother, you will dismount. You remember what you must do?" "I remember." I kept my eyes upon him as he got off his horse and began to shamble towards me. I saw Alizard hand something to Von Beck, who was closest to me. Sheridan had not noticed. Her whole attention was on the resurrected corpse of the brother she had murdered. As he drew closer, I detected the stink of corruption about him. Was this the body my soul was expected to inhabit? Page 619. Von Beck's hand touched mine. I opened my palm and accepted what he gave me. It was the pulsing warmth of the Actorius stone. It was the only shield we had against sorcery in this realm. Flamadin's dead fingers reached my face. I threw up my arms to defend myself, still unable to pull free of the solid rock encasing my lower legs. There was a peculiar, meaningless grin on Flamadin's lips, more like a rictus of death than an expression of humour. The breath from his mouth was foul. "Give me your soul, champion. I must eat it, and then I shall be whole again." Unthinkingly I brought up the Actorius and smashed it against that half-rotten forehead. It seemed to sear into the flesh. There was a stink of burning. Flamadin merely stood where he was, making a kind of gulping noise. There was a blazing mark in his head where the stone had struck him. "What's this? What's this?" shrieked Balarisaf in a voice of frustrated malevolence. "There is no time for delays. Not now. Hurry, do what you must do." Again Flamadin reached out for me. I prepared myself to strike a second blow, but then it occurred to me to try something else. With the writhing Actorius, I drew a circle around myself in the red crystal. "No!" cried Sheridan. "Ah, the Actorius! He has Actorius! I did not know!" The rock around me began to bubble and heave, giving off a pinkish vapour. I pulled myself free and stood upon the solid crystal. I threw the Actorius to Von Beck, telling him to imitate what I had done, and I began to run towards the crimson wall. Behind me lumbered Flamadin, while Sheridan screamed, "Lord Barazirov, stop him! He will reach the sword!" Page 620. Balarisaf said reasonably, "It matters not to me which one of you reaches it, so long as it is used for my purposes." This gave me pause. Was I inadvertently falling into a trap set by the Lord of Chaos? I turned. My friends were running towards me, but Flamadin was ahead of them. His fingers again reached for my face. "I must feed," he told me. "I must have your soul. No other will do." This time I did not have the Actorius. I pushed at his cold body, trying to keep him away. But with every touch I felt something of myself ebbing out, being drained by him. I tried to move back, but I had reached the crystal wall. "Champion," said Flamadin greedily, as eyes had begun to take on a semblance of life. "Champion, hero, I shall be a hero again. I shall have what is my right." Even as I fought with him, my energy was being sucked from me. My friends reached us. They tried to pull him back, but he was stuck to me like a leech. I heard Sheridan laughing. Then Alizard pressed the Actorius against Flamadin's throat. He gave a great choking roar and tried to throw her off him. Fire seemed to burn my own neck. I was horrified by the degree of symbiosis I now experienced. I was sobbing as I still struggled to free myself from him. Flamadin's ruined flesh was glowing with my life. I felt my vision dimming. There was a flickering sight of myself from Flamadin's viewpoint. "I am John Dacre," I cried. "I am John Dacre." I managed to restore something of myself by this reminder, but wherever, in her panic, Alizard applied the Actorius, I still burned. At last I fell to the ground, completely weakened. My friends tried to drag me further away from the chaos creatures, but I begged them to stop Flamadin. Even now he was flattening himself against the crystal near where the sword was embedded. I could see that inch by inch he was himself being absorbed by the rock. Then he had gone completely into it. I felt that I too was wading through the crimson crystal. I saw my own hand reaching out for the hilt of that great black and green sword with its rune-carved blade, its flickering yellow flame. Page 621. Meanwhile, through John Dacre's eyes, I saw Balarisaf smiling. He was content with what was happening and made no move to interfere. Only Sheridan was uncertain. She could not tell how much of my substance had been sucked into the doppelganger. My own point of view shifted back and forth. Part of the time I was Flamadin, reaching still for the great blade. Part of the time I was John Dacre, being helped up by my friends who looked wildly about them for some means of escape, or at least a weapon of defence. We had the Actorius. It occurred to me that neither Balazilaf nor Sheridan were over-eager to move against us while we had that stone. Inch by inch, Flamadin waded through the crystal. I was in intense pain. I murmured over and over again that I was John Dacre, and only John Dacre. Yet my decrepit fingers reached for a sword and proved that I was also Flamadin. I groaned. I wanted to vomit. There was a kind of whispering echo in my head, which I came to believe was Flamadin's mind struggling for life, recalling some argument which perhaps his sister had tried to instill in him before she resorted to murder. The sword can cure the evil at source. The sword can bring harmony. The sword is an honourable weapon, but not in the wrong hands. The sword used in defence is actively good. "No," I cried, addressing whatever vestiges of the original Flamadin remained. "It is a deception. The sword is still a sword. The sword, Flamadin, is still a sword. Touch that blade, Prince Flamadin of the Valadec, and you are condemned for ever to limbo." I heard Sheridan urging him on. With John Dacre's eyes, I saw her take a step further towards the crystal cliff. Flamadin's hands were almost upon the sword's hilt now. Within that ghastly body, I struggled to hold back the hand, but there was a desperate will at work. What had been Flamadin's was greedy for life, greedy for the rewards it had been promised. Page 622. All around me the red light glowed. All around me were shards, fragments, reflections. I thought I could see 1,000 versions of myself. I was weakening. "I am John Dacre," I moaned. "I am only John Dacre." Flamadin touched the sword. The blade moaned a little, as if in recognition. He clasped the hilt. It did not resist him. It did not give him pain to touch it. No, I was almost entirely Flamadin, exulting in this power, this strange version of life I had achieved. I drew the sword up. I displayed it to those who peered through the crystal watching me. As John Dacre, I was slowly dying as the last of my soul began to merge with Flamadin's. I wrenched myself from that mind. I was whimpering and crying as I reached out for the Actorius which Elisard still held. "I am John Dacre. This is my reality." The same hand which enfolded the dragon's sword now also enfolded the Actorius. I heard screaming. It was myself. It was Flamadin. It was John Dacre. I was both of them. I was being torn into two. Now John Dacre made one huge effort to pull his soul free from the body of Flamadin. I recalled my childhood, my first job, my holidays. We had rented a thatched cottage in Somerset, not far from the sea. Which year had that been? Flamadin was weakening a little. His viewpoint became hazy, while John Dacre's grew stronger. In recalling my common humanity, by rejecting the role of hero, I had the chance to free myself from the burden which had fallen upon me, and in freeing myself, I might possibly help others. I was sure that John Dacre was winning the struggle, but now Sheridan was joining in the fight, and Balazilaf, too. I heard them urging Flamadin to use the sword, to do what he had sworn to do. I fought against him, but his arm swung back. I tried to stop him even then. His arm came forward, the dragon's sword slicing into the stuff of the crystal wall. He was carving a gateway for chaos. Page 623. I moaned in my weakness as John Dacre. Having dragged my soul back from Flamadin, now I sought to return, so that I could put a halt to what he did. The dragon's sword rose again. It struck the crystal wall again. Rosy light flared, rays burst in all directions, and through the rent made by the sword I saw darkness. And in the darkness was another world, a world in which I glimpsed white towers gleaming, a familiar world. They had planned this exactly. The gateway into chaos would be the gateway into the vast Adelstain cave, where Sharadim's army laid siege to the last defenders of the 6 realms. I shouted out my horror. I heard Sharadim's laughter. I turned as John Dacre, and saw Balarissa seem to swell to twice his height, an expression of sublime satisfaction on his features. "He is cutting an entrance into Adelstain," I told my friends. "We must stop him." Whatever now animated Flamadin was not my soul. I had reclaimed it all. But even as my strength returned, I saw the red crystal flow and dissipate, filling the sky again, turning to liquid again, and that unholy radiance was pouring through into the gigantic cavern. Without thinking, I ran after Flamadin, still seeking to stop him, but he had passed through the narrow gateway he had carved. I saw him striding to where, on the floor of the cave, Sharadim's armies were camped. There were stone huts now and tents, and here and there were the massive Maschenheimer hulls pressed into service against Adelstain. Alizard and Von Beck were with me as we clambered down rocks to the cave. Flamadin was shouting something to the warriors, many of whom had plainly been touched by chaos already. They had the warped bestial features I had seen on Armiad and the others. Page 624. "For chaos, cried Flamadin. "I have returned. Now I shall lead you against our enemies. Now we shall know true victory." I half believed that Flamadin was animated by the sword itself. The armies were both dazzled and baffled by the crimson light suddenly flooding into the cavern. Sharadim and Balarissaf were not yet through. I knew that soon the gap must widen further and allow the whole of chaos to come through, to infect, mile by mile, gentle, Bargenheim, and eventually the whole of the 6 realms, and I could see no way now of stopping this encroachment. "We are through! Oh, we are through!" This was Sharadim's voice behind me. She had remounted her black charger. She had drawn her own sword. She was riding after us. Flamadin, flailing and stumbling like a scarecrow, was making for the nearest hull. A terrible stink came off the vessel. The smoke which curled from its chimneys was, if anything, even more foul than before. My only thought was to reach him before Sharadim caught up with him, to wrest the dragon's sword from him and try to do what I could to save those who survived in Adelstain. I knew my friend shared my ambition. Together we began to climb up the hull, choking back our nausea at the stench. All around us now the hosts of chaos were beginning to stir, grunting, yelling, pointing. Then, as Sharadim rode out of the crimson glare, a great cheer went up. I looked towards Adelstain and her fiery ring, which still held her delicate lacy white towers, her superb beauty. I could not let this be destroyed, not while I still had life. As the 3 of us reached the rails, we saw on the main deck the Baron Captain Armiad himself, lifting his own sword to salute Flamadin. Whether by chance or by destiny, we had arrived back on the frowning shield. So engrossed in their triumphs were they, that they did not see us come aboard. We were horrified at the condition of the vessel. The few inhabitants who remained were in a wretched state, evidently enslaved to do the work of war. Men, women, and children were in rags. They looked starved, they looked beaten, yet I saw more than one face which still held hope when they saw us. Page 625. We were able to run for the cover of one of the houses. Almost immediately we were joined by a bony wretch whose dirty features still bore the traces of youth and beauty. "Champion," she said, "it is you. Then who is that other?" It was Belinda, the enthusiastic young student we'd first met aboard this vessel. Her voice was cracked. She looked close to death. "What is wrong with you, Belinda?" whispered Alizard. The young woman shook her head. "Nothing specific. But since Armiad declared war upon those who opposed him, we have been made to toil almost without rest. Many have died, and we of the Frowning Shield are considered fortunate. I still cannot believe how swiftly our world changed from one ruled by justice to one dominated by tyranny." "Once a disease takes hold," said Wombeck gravely, "it spreads so rapidly that it can rarely be checked in time. I saw this happen to my own world. One must be forever vigilant, it seems." I watched Armiad lead Flamadin to the stairway of the central deck. Flamadin continued to hold the dragon sword above his head, displaying it to all. I looked across the floor of the cavern and saw Sheridan riding towards the hull, calling out to Flamadin, who ignored her. He was enjoying his own strange triumph. The corpse's features were twisted in a hideous parody of mirth. He swung up from the central deck into the rigging of the mainmast, so that he could be seen by all those gathered below. I knew that I had a few minutes to get to Flamadin before his sister. Without further consideration, I began to climb, planning to use the network of spars and ropes to reach him, just as I once used them as a short-cut when moving about the ship. Page 626. Hand over hand, I went up the spider web of greasy ropes, then swung myself closer to the central deck. Flamadin stood upon a platform now so that he could again display the dragon sword. His poor ruined flesh seemed about to fall from his bones. The gesture, as he raised the blade, was almost pathetic. "Your hero," he cried in that bleak, dead voice of his, "has returned." Even as I worked my way towards him, I could not help but see him as a telling parody of what I myself had become. I did not like the picture. I continued while I crawled along a spar over the heads of the gathered warriors to remind myself that I was John Dacre. I had been a painter of some description. I seemed to recall and had had a studio overlooking the Thames. Flamadin sensed me even as I made to drop down on him. His corpse's eyes looked up. He had the appearance of a startled child whose new toy was about to be taken from him. "Please," he said softly, "let me keep it a little while. Sheridan wants it too." "There's no time," I said. I let myself go. I dropped beside him. Holding the Actorius before me, I reached for the dragon sword. I could see the yellow flame flickering at its heart, behind the runes. "Please," begged Flamadin. "In the name of what you once were, Prince Flamadin, give me that blade," I said. He winced away from the Actorius. I heard a commotion below. It was Armiad. "There are two of them, two the same. Which is ours?" My hand closed on his wrist. He was far weaker now than he had been. The sword's strength no longer filled him. Indeed, it was as if the blade called back its energy and took what was left of Flamadin also. "This sword is not evil," he said. "Sheridan told me it is not evil. It can be used for good." "It is a sword," I told him. "It is a weapon. It was made to kill." A crooked, miserable smile came on his corrupted features. Page 627. "Then how can it ever do good?" "When it is broken," I said, and I turned his wrist, and the dragon's sword fell free. Armiad and his men were climbing up the rigging. All were heavily armed. I think they understood at last what was happening. I looked back into the cavern. Sheridan was almost at the hull, and there was an army following her. A peculiar sobbing sound came from Flamadin as he watched me retrieve the dragon's sword. "She promised me my soul back if I bore the blade for chaos. But it was not my soul, was it?" "No," I said. "It was mine. That was why she kept you alive. In that manner you deceived the dragon's sword." "Can I die now?" "Soon," I promised. I swung around. Armiad's men had reached the platform. The dragon's sword was shouting in my two hands. In spite of all I had gone through, all I had decided for myself, I found that I was joining in its song, that I was filled with a wonderful wild glee. I lifted the blade. I sheared through the necks of the first two raiders. Their headless bodies fell onto others below them, and all tumbled down to the distant deck in a tangle of gouting blood and jerking limbs. With the sword in one hand, I reached for a trailing rope and swung out over my antagonists, slashing at them as I went. I slid down to the deck, behind Armiad, who had been one of the last into the rigging. "I believe you wished to settle an account with me," I told him, laughing. He looked in horror at my sword, at my face. He mouthed something as he shrank back against the mast. I stepped forward, then placed the tip of the dragon's sword into the wood of the deck. "I am here, Baron Captain. Settlement is due. I'm sure you'll agree."
Page 628.
Reluctantly, his pig snout twitching, he returned to the deck. All his men were watching now. Their bestial faces were intent on the scene. Suddenly there was a monstrous roar from behind me. I glanced over my left shoulder. The crimson light was flaring still brighter. The gap was growing wider. I saw movement behind it, huge grotesque figures mounted on even stranger steeds. Then I had to return my gaze to Armiad. Sword in hand, he reluctantly advanced. I thought I could hear a kind of whimpering coming from his fluttering snout. "I'll kill you quickly," I promised him, "but kill you I must, my lord." And then I felt a heavy weight land squarely on my back. I fell sprawling, the dragon's sword flying from my grasp. I struggled to get up. I heard Armiad give a great snort of startled glee. I felt cold lips on my neck. I smelled fetid breath. Looking up, I saw Armiad and his men begin to close around me. I tried to reach the dragon's sword, but someone kicked it away. And Flamadin, still straddling my back, said through rotting lips, "Now I shall feed again, and you, John Dacre, will die. I shall be the only hero of the 6 realms." Chapter 4. On Flamadin's orders, Armiad and his men seized me. With his strange, awkward movements, my doppelganger walked towards the dragon's sword and picked it up again. "The sword will drink your soul," he said, "and then it will in turn invigorate me. I and the sword shall be one, immortal,
and invincible. I shall know the admiration of the 6 realms once more." He seemed to wince as he grasped the blade, staring at me almost with regret. It was impossible for me to understand what terrible cold fragments of a soul still moved him, how much of the original darling of the worlds of the wheel remained. His sister had been able to stay the progress of his body's corruption, but now he was disintegrating before my eyes. Yet he hoped for life. He hoped for my life. Armiad grunted with pleasure. His clammy hands now held my arm. "Kill him, Prince Flamadin. I have so longed to be witness to his death, ever since he first impersonated you and brought upon me the mockery of my fellow captains. Kill him, my lord." On the other side of me was something I dimly recognized as Moffa Gorb, Armiad's binkeeper. Now his nose had elongated and his eyes had grown closer together, so that he resembled some kind of dog. His grip on my arm was tight. Saliva flecked his muscle. He, too, was enjoying my anticipated death. Flamadin drew back his arm until the point of the dragon's sword was a few inches from my heart. Then, with a kind of sob, he made to thrust. The entire cavern was a mass of noise and moving warriors, all bathed in that same crimson light. Page 630. Yet I heard one sound above the others, a sharp, precise crack. Flamadin grunted and paused. There was an inflamed hole in his forehead. From it oozed a substance which might once have been blood. He lowered the dragon's sword. He turned to look behind him. There stood Ulrich von Beck, Count of Saxony, with a smoking Walther PPK 38 in his hand. Flamadin tried to stagger towards this new assailant, the dragon's sword still half raised. Then he had fallen to the deck, and I knew the final vestiges of life had deserted him. Yet Armiad and his men still held me. Moffa Gorb produced a long knife, plainly intending to slit my throat. He gave a strange little grunt and dropped the knife. Another wound blossomed, this time in the side of Moffa Gorb's head. Armiad dropped his hold on my arm. The rest of the ghastly crew began to back away. But now Elizard had leapt forward, snatching up Moffa Gorb's sword, and she was thrusting at the Baron Captain, who defended himself most ferociously and well against the ghost woman, but was no match either for her grace or her skill with a sword. She had pierced the porcine heart in moments, then turned her attention on the others. I, too, fought with a borrowed sword. There were too many between me and Flamadin's corpse. I fought as best I could, trying to reach it, and von Beck, too, had a sword. The 3 of us were at last standing together. "Bellander kept your gun for you, I see," I cried to von Beck. He grinned. "I now don't regret asking her to look after it. I thought I'd never see it again. Unfortunately, there were only 2 shells left." "Well used," I said gratefully. Suddenly we realized that we were surrounded entirely by dead men. All Armiad's disgusting crew were defeated. A few wounded crawled here and there, attempting to escape. Page 631. Von Beck uttered a cheerful yell of triumph, but this was swiftly cut short by a scream from Bellander, for, making an impossible leap on her great black stallion, there came the figure of Sheridan, landing full on the central deck, the hooves pounding like battle drums above the corpse of her brother, the dragon sword still in his hand. I began to run then, trying to reach the blade before she could dismount. But with a great billowing of her cloak, she was off the back of the snorting beast and had reached down to wrest the dragon's sword from her brother's death grip. As she took hold of the dragon's sword, she gasped with pain. She was not meant to hold it. Only by an effort of will did she lift it. Yet lift it she did, and she maintained her hold upon it. I continued to be struck by her extraordinary beauty. As she carried the dragon's sword back towards her horse, apparently unconscious of any who observed her, I thought she resembled more than any woman I had ever seen the goddess it was her ambition to become. I stepped forward. "Princess Sheridan, that sword is not yours to carry." She had reached her horse now. She looked round slowly, frowning in irritation. "What?" "It is mine," I said. She put her lovely head on one side and stared at me. "What?" "You must not take the dragon's sword. Only I have the right to bear it now." She began to climb into her saddle. I could think of no other action but to take out the Erekose and hold it up before me. Its pulsing, writhing light made my hand grow black, red, and purple. "In the name of the balance, I claim the dragon's sword," I told her. Her face clouded. Her eyes blazed. "You are dead," she said slowly, through gritted teeth. "I am not. Give me the dragon's sword." "I have earned this blade and all it stands for," she told me, pale with rage. "It is mine by right. I have served chaos. I have given the 6 realms to Lord Balarisaf to do with as he will. At any moment he and all his kind will come riding through the gateway I by my actions created, and I shall receive my reward. I shall be made a sword ruler with dominion over my own realms. I shall be immortal, and as an immortal I shall hold this sword as the sign of my power." Page 632. "You will die," I said simply. "Balarisaf will kill you. The Lords of Chaos do not keep their promises. It is against their nature to do so." "You are lying, champion. Go away from me. I have no use for you as yet." "You must give me that sword, Sheridan." The Erekose pulsed with stronger light. It was almost wholly organic, as it sat in the palm of my hand. I stood beside her now. She clasped the blade to her. I could tell that everywhere it touched, it gave her intense pain. But she ignored the pain, believing that soon she would never experience physical agony again. I could see the little yellow flame flickering back behind the runes carved into the black metal. The Erekose began to sing. It sang in a small, beautiful voice. It sang to the dragon's sword. And the dragon's sword murmured a response. That murmur became a strong, powerful moan, almost a shout. "No, no, no," cried Sheridan. Her skin too reflected the peculiar writhing light. "Look, look, champion, chaos comes, chaos comes." And laughing, she swept the blade round so that the Erekose was struck cleanly from my hand. I dived towards it, but she was swifter. She had raised the blade, yelling in her pain as it burned her hands. She meant to destroy the Erekose. My first instinct was to dash forward and save it at all costs, and then I remembered something Sepiris had told me. I stepped back. She grinned at me, the loveliest wolf in the world. "Now you realize there is no defeating me," she said. Page 633. She brought down the blade with incredible ferocity, striking accurately at the shining stone, which lay there, pulsing like a living heart. She screamed as the blade connected with the Actorios. It was a scream of complete triumph which turned, all in the space of a second, to bafflement, and then to anger, and then to nothing but agony. The Actorios was shattered. It burst into fragments. It exploded in all directions. And each fragment now contained an image of Sheridan. Each fragment of the Actorios was bearing part of Sheridan away into limbo. She had thought to make herself all things to all people. Now it was as if each persona had separated and was imprisoned in a splinter of that peculiar stone. Yet Sheridan herself still stood there, frozen in her final act of destruction. Gradually, expression of enraged pain changed to one of terror. She began to shiver. The dragon's sword moaned and wailed in her hands. Her flesh seemed to boil on her bones. All that astonishing beauty was vanishing. Von Beck, Belander, and Alizard made their way towards me, but I gestured for them to go back. "There is great danger still to come," I shouted. "You must go to Adelstein. Tell the Eldren and the Ursine princes what is happening here. Tell them they must wait and watch." "But chaos comes," said Alizard. "Look!" The figures I had seen in the redness were larger than before, grotesque riders led by Balazirsaf himself. The lords of hell were riding to claim their new kingdom. "To Adelstein, hurry," I told them. "But what will you do, Herr Dacre?" asked von Beck. His face was full of concern for me. "What I must, what has become my duty." I thought he would understand these words. Von Beck inclined his head. "We shall await your presence in Adelstein." It was clear that all three of them thought themselves as good as dead. Page 634. The huge rent in the cosmic fabric was growing wider still, and the black riders waited impatiently for it to become large enough to admit them. I stopped and picked up the dragon's sword. It made a small, sweet sound, as if recognizing a kinsman. All around the blade the fragments of the Actorios were whirling, like planets around the sun. In some of those fragments, as they went by, I saw one of Sheridan's many faces staring out, with the same expression of horror she had worn just before her body collapsed. I looked down at her shriveled corpse. It lay across that of her brother. One had represented the evil of the world, the other the good. Yet both had been defeated by pride, by ambition, by a promise of immortality. I watched as von Beck, Alizard, and Belander disappeared over the side of the hull. The camps of Sheridan's army were in confusion now. They seemed to be awaiting their leader's command. There was a fair chance that my friends could reach Adelstein unhindered. They had to go there. They could not, I knew, survive what was yet to come. Now I lifted up the sword and set my mind into a particular pattern. I remembered Sepures telling me what I must do when the Actorios was shattered, what power I could call upon. I could hear them chanting in the back of my brain. I could hear their despairing voices as I had heard them 1,000 times in my dreams. We are the lost. We are the last. We are the unkind. We are the warriors at the edge of time, and we are tired. We are tired. We are tired of making love. Now I release you, warriors, I release you. your moment has come again, by the power of the sword, by the destruction of the Actorius, by the will of the balance, by the need of humankind. I summon you. Chaos threatens, chaos shall conquer. You are needed. Now on the far side of the cavern, above the wonderful white city of Adelstain, I saw a cliff, and on that cliff was lined rank upon rank of men. Some rode horses, some were on foot, all were armed, all were armoured. All stared fixedly towards me as if in sleep. Page 635. We are the shards of your illusions, the remains of your hopes. We are the warriors at the edge of time. Warriors, your time has come. You may fight again. One more battle, one more cycle. Come, chaos rides against us. I ran to Sharadim's stallion, which panted and snorted near the corpse of its mistress. It did not resist when I climbed into the saddle. It seemed glad of a rider. I turned it towards the rail of the hull and galloped forward, leapt clear over the side of the vessel, and landed on the rocky floor of the cave, where Sharadim's soldiers came forward in a flood of flesh and metal to cheer me. I had thought them my enemies. I was baffled for a moment until I realized with a kind of ironic delight that they knew only of Flamadin and Sharadim. They thought me their empress's brother and consort. They were waiting for me to lead them against Adelstain in the name of chaos. I looked backward. The huge crimson wound was swelling larger and larger. The grotesque black shapes were growing. I looked towards Adelstain. "Warriors," I cried, "warriors to me!" The warriors at the edge of time had awakened. They were pouring down from the cliffs above Adelstain, running along invisible paths towards me. "Warriors, warriors, chaos comes!" There was a wind howling now, a crimson wind. It blew upon us all. "Warriors, warriors of the edge, to me, to me!" The stallion reared under me, hooves flailing. It uttered a great snort of pleasure, as if it awaited this moment, as if it lived only to gallop into battle. The dragon's sword was alive in my right hand. It sang, and it glowed with that dark radiance I had known so many times before, in so many different guises. And yet it still seemed to me that there was a quality in it which was not quite the same as any I had known before. "Warriors to me!" Page 636. They came in their thousands, in all manner of war gear, with every strange weapon it was possible to conceive. They marched and they rode, and their faces had come to life as if they too, like the stallion, understood only battle. I felt that I too was never more truly alive than when I bore my blade in war. I was the eternal champion. I had led vast armies. I had slaughtered whole races. I was the very epitome of bloody conflict. I had brought it nobility, poetry, justification. I had brought it heroic dignity. Yet within me a voice insisted that this must be the last such fight. I was John Dacre. I did not wish to kill in any cause. I wished merely to live, to love, and to know peace. The warriors at the edge were forming ranks around me. They had unsheathed their many weapons. They were yelling and animated. They knew joy. And I wondered if each of these had once been like me. Were they all aspects of heroic warriors, all aspects even of the eternal champion? Certainly many of their faces had a certain familiarity to me, so much that I dared not look at them too closely. The Princess Sharadim's soldiers were now in confusion. The warriors of the Edge turned hard killers' eyes upon them. Yet they did nothing. They awaited my orders. Now one of Sharadim's generals came riding through the ranks. He was very fine in his dark blue armour, his plumes, his spiked helm, his full black beard. "My Lord Emperor, the allies you promised us, are they all assembled?" His face was bathed in crimson light. "Does chaos come to aid us in our destruction? Is that our sign?" I drew a breath, and then I sighed, poising my sword. "Here is your sign," I said. I swung the blade in a single movement, which sheared off his head so that it fell with a heavy clanking to the ground. Then I cried out to the assembled army, which Sharadim had raised to conquer the 6 realms. "There is your enemy. In fighting chaos, you stand some small chance of salvation. If you stand against us, you will perish." Page 637. I heard a babble of questions, but I ignored them. I turned my black stallion towards the widening crimson wound. I lifted my sword in a sign to all who would follow me. And then I was charging at full gallop towards the Lords of Chaos. There was a sound behind me, a mighty yell which could have been a single voice. It was the battle shout of the warriors at the edge of time. It was an exultation. They had come to life. They had come to the only life they knew. Now through the crimson gateway the massive black figures rode in. I saw Balarisaf, powerful in armour, which flowed about his body like mercury. I saw a creature with a head of a stag, another which resembled a tiger, while many others bore no likeness at all to anything which had ever walked or crept upon any realm I had visited. And from them came a peculiar stink. It was both pleasant and horrible. It was both warm and cold. It had an animal quality about it, yet it could also have been the smell of vegetation. It was the pure stink of chaos, the odour which legend said rose always out of hell. Balarisaf reined in his scaly steed as he saw me. He was stern. His voice was kindly. He shook his huge head, and when he spoke, his voice was a booming reverberation. "Little mortal, the game is over. The game is over, and chaos has won. Do you still not understand? Ride with us, and I will feed you. I will let you have creatures to play with. I will let you remain alive." "You must go back to chaos," I said. "It is where you and your kind belong. You have no business here, Archduke Balarisaf, and she who made a bargain with you is dead." "Dead?" Balarisaf was disbelieving. "You killed her?" "She killed herself. Now all the different women who were Sharadim, who deceived so many of her kind, are scattered through limbo forever. It is a harsh fate, but it is deserved." Page 638. There is no one left to welcome you, Archduke Balarisaf. If you enter this realm now, you will disobey the law of the balance. How do you see that? You know it is true. You must be called whether there be a gateway or no. Archduke Balarisaf made a noise in his huge chest. He put a hand the size of a house to his face. He scratched his nose. "But if I enter, what can stop me? The invitation was there. A mortal prepared the gateway. Those realms are mine. I have an army," I said, "and I wield the dragon's sword. You spoke of the balance. It is a fine point, I think. I do not recognize your logic, and I believe that the balance would not recognize it. What does it matter to me if you have raised an army? Look at what I bring against you." And he swept his monstrous arm to show not only his immediate liegemen, lesser nobles of chaos, but a seething tide which could have been animals or humans, or neither, for their form was hardly constant. "This is chaos, little champion, and there is more. You are forbidden to cross into our realm," I said firmly. "I have summoned the warriors of the Edge, and I wield the dragon's sword." "So you persist in telling me. Am I to praise you? Or how must I be impressed, little mortal? I am an Archduke of Chaos, and I was summoned by mortals to rule their worlds. That is enough." "Then it seems we must do battle," I said. He smiled. "If that is what you wish to call it." I pointed my dragon's sword forward. Again came the great shout from my back. I was riding resolutely into the teeth of chaos. There was nothing else I could do. The rest was battle. It was like all the battles I had ever fought made into one. It seemed to last for eternity. Wave upon wave of belching, whining, barking, squealing, stinking things were thrown against me, some with weapons, some with teeth and claws, some with imploring eyes which begged a mercy they could never return. And yet all about me, like an impervious wall of hardened flesh, of muscle and bone, which seemed tireless, I saw my allies, the warriors of the Edge. Each of these fought as skilfully as I, and some fell, engulfed by the creatures of chaos. But there were more to replace them. Page 639. The tide of chaos came, wave after wave upon us, and wave after wave it was repulsed. Moreover, some of the humans fought with us. They fought with a will, glad to be no longer in Sharadim's service. They died, but they died knowing that they had, in the end, not betrayed their own kind. The Lords of Chaos had kept back from all this. They disdained to fight mere mortals. Yet it grew plain as the hours wore on that their creatures could not defeat us. It was as if we had been destined for this one great fight, trained in every arena of war the multiverse could provide, and I knew that in some sense this was my last fight, that if I succeeded in this, I might know peace, if only for a while. Slowly the ranks of chaos were growing thinner. My blade was encrusted with their life stuff. It did not seem the same as blood. And my arm grew so tired I felt it would fall from its socket. My horse bled from 100 different cuts, and I too had received several wounds. But I hardly noticed them. We were the warriors at the edge of time, and we fought until we were killed. There was nothing else for us to do. Now Archduke Balarisaf came riding through his forces again, and he was not disdainful. He did not laugh. He was grim, and he was fierce. He was angry, but he no longer mocked me with his gaze. "Champion, why fight so hard? Call a truce, and we'll discuss terms." This time I turned my horse toward him. I summoned energy for myself and my sword, and I charged. Page 640. I charged into the face of the Archduke of Chaos. I flew, my horse's hooves galloping on air, straight towards that huge and supernatural bulk. I was weeping, I was shouting. I wanted only to destroy him. Yet I knew I could not kill him. It was indeed likely that he would kill me. I did not care. in a fury at all the terror he had brought to the 6 realms, at all the misery he had sown and would always sow, at the wretchedness he had created wherever his ambitions took him, I hurled myself and my sword at his face, aiming at his treacherous mouth. From behind me I heard again that great exulted battle shout of the warriors. It was as if they recognized what I did and encouraged me, celebrating my action, honoring whatever it was that moved me to attack the Archduke. The point of the dragon's sword touched that suddenly opened maw. I felt for one moment that I must be swallowed by him, falling into his red throat. The saddle of my horse was no longer under me. I sailed directly at Archduke Balarisaf's head. And then it had vanished, and I felt earth beneath my feet. The crimson wound was closing before me. I looked and saw the piled corpses of our enemies and the corpses of our allies. I saw the bodies of 10,000 warriors who had died in that battle, whose memory was even now fading from my mind. It had been so terrible. I turned. The warriors of the edge were sheathing their weapons, wiping blood from their axes, inspecting their wounds. They had expressions of regret upon their faces, as if they had been disappointed, as if they wished to continue the fight. I counted them. There were 14 still alive, 14 together with myself. The crimson wound in the cosmic fabric was healing rapidly. It was now hardly large enough to accept a man, and through it stepped a single figure. The figure paused, looking back to watch the gap close and vanish. It was suddenly cold in the cavern of Adelstein. The 14 warriors saluted me, then marched into the shadows. They were gone. Page 641. They rest until the next cycle, said the newcomer. They are allowed a battle only once, and those who die are the fortunate. The others must wait. That is the fate of the warriors at the edge of time. But what is their crime? I asked. Sepiris removed his black and yellow helm. He made a small gesture with his hand. Not a crime exactly. Some would call it a sin, perhaps. They lived only to fight. They did not know when to stop. Are they all former incarnation of the eternal champion? I asked him. He looked thoughtfully at me, sucking his upper lip. Then he shrugged. If you like. Surely you owe me some more substantial explanation, my lord, I said. He took me by the shoulder. He turned me towards Adelstein, and we began to walk over stones slippery with the blood of all those dead thousands. Here and there the wounded were tending to one another. The hulls and the tents and the stone shanties were full of the dying now. I owe you nothing, champion. You are owed nothing. You owe nothing. I can speak for myself, I said. I have a debt. Would you not say it is fully paid now? He stopped. He opened his mouth, and he laughed at my confusion. Paid now, champion, eh? I bowed my head in acceptance. I am weary, I said. Come. He walked on through all those corpses, all that ruin. There is work still to do. But first we must take news of your victory into Adelstein. Are you aware of what you achieved? We fought back the encroachment of chaos. Have we saved the 6 realms? Oh, yes, of course. But you did more. Do you not know what it was? Was it not enough? Page 642. Possibly, But you were also responsible for banishing an Archduke of Chaos to limbo. Balarisaf can never rule again. He challenged the balance. Even then he might have won, but your act of courage was decisive. Such an action contains so much that is noble, so much that is powerful, so much that affects the very nature of the multiverse, that its effect was greater than any other. You are truly a hero now, Sir Champion. I have no wish to be a hero any longer, Lord Sepiris, and that is doubtless why you are such a great one. You have earned respite. Respite? Is that all? It is more than is allowed to most of us, he said in some astonishment. I have never known it. Chastened, I let him lead me through the fiery ring of Adelstein and into the arms of my dear friends. The fight is over, said Sepiris. On all the plains, in all of the realms, it is over. Now the healing and the changing must begin. Chapter 5. We shall know a better peace now, said Morandipag. For those who remain in the 6 realms, there must be building, of course, and replanting, but rather than withholding our ancient knowledge and retreating into our caves, we, the Ursine princes, will do our best to help. So too shall each of the races give their special skills to the common good. The white city of Adelstein was tranquil once more. The remains of Sharadim's army, who had fought with us against Chaos, had returned to their different worlds, determined to ensure that their future would never again allow the rise of a tyrant. Never again would they be deceived by such as Sharadim into making war upon one another. New councils were being formed, drawn from all the races, and the time of the great Massin would not now be merely a time for trading. Only the Lady Filisson and her Eldrin women had not returned to Gistunheim, which, we had heard, had been razed by Sharadim's warriors. They were making specific preparations for their own departure. Belander of the Mashenheim had gone back to her people, aboard the Frowning Shield, promising us that if we should ever return to the Mashenheim, we would experience better hospitality than any we had previously known. We bade her farewell with special affection. I knew that if she had not kept the gun in trust for Von Beck all those months, I for one would probably not be alive. Alisard, Falisson, Von Beck and myself were guests in the comfortable study which the Ursine princes used for their own conferences and gatherings. Page 644. Again the clouds of incense filled the fireplace and drifted throughout the room as discreetly the bear-like people did their best to disguise their distaste for our smell. Morandipag had already declared his decision not to return to his sea crag, but to work with his fellows towards the improvement of communication between the 6 realms. "You have done much for us, you 3, said Grofer Rome with a wave of his silken sleeve. "And you, champion, will be remembered in legends, that is certain. Perhaps as Prince Flamadin, for legends have a habit of mingling, transforming and becoming something new." I inclined my head, saying politely, "I am honoured, Prince Grofer Rome, though for my own part I would be glad to see a world free of heroes and legends, especially heroes such as myself." "I do not believe that is possible," said the Ursine prince. "All one can hope for is that the legends celebrate what is noble in the spirit, what is honourable in deeds and ambitions. We have known ages when the legends have not celebrated what is noble, when the heroes were self-serving, clever creatures who improved their own situation against the interests of the rest. Those cultures are usually ones which are close to decay and death. Better to praise idealism than denigrate it, I think. So idealism can lead to acts of unspeakable evil? Asked von Beck. That which is valuable is always in danger of being devalued, said Morandi Peg. That which is pure can always be corrupted. It is our business to find the balance. He smiled. For we do not echo in our domestic actions the war which rages between chaos and law. Moderation is, in the end, also survival. But this is what we learn in middle age, I suppose. Sometimes the proponents of excess must triumph. Sometimes the proponents of restraint must win. That is the way of things. That is what maintains the balance. I do not believe I have much of a care for the cosmic balance, I said, nor for the machinations of law and chaos, nor for gods and devils. I believe that we alone should control our own destinies. Page 645. And so we shall, said Morandi Peg. And so we shall, my friend. There are many cycles yet to come in the great history of the multiverse. In some of them the supernatural shall be banished, just as you banished Archduke Balarisaf from this world. But our will and our nature is such that at other times those gods, in different guises, will return. The power is always ultimately within ourselves. It depends how much responsibility we are prepared to take. And that is what Sybaris told me when he said I should know respite? It seems so. Morandi Peg scratched at his grizzled fur. The knight in black and yellow travels constantly between the planes. Some even think he has the power to travel through the megaflow, through time, if you like, between one cycle and the next. Few have such great power or such terrible responsibility. Occasionally, it is said, he sleeps. He has brothers, according to what I have heard, all of whom share with him the duty of maintaining the balance. But I understand little more of his activities, for all my own studies in the matter. Some say he even now sows the seeds for the salvation of the next cycle, as well as for its destruction. Perhaps that is too fanciful a notion. I wonder if I shall see him again. He said his work was done here, and that mine was almost done. Why should there be such a peculiar affinity between certain people and certain objects? Why is it that von Beck can handle the Grail and I can handle the sword, and so on? Morandi Peg made a grunting noise at the back of his throat. He put his muzzle into the fireplace and took a deep breath of the fumes. Then he sat back in his armchair. If certain schemes are set at certain times, if certain functions are required to ensure the survival of the multiverse, so that neither law nor chaos shall ever gain full command of it, then perhaps certain creatures must be matched to certain powerful artifacts. After all, every race has legends concerning such things. Page 646. These affinities are part of the pattern, and the maintenance of the pattern, of order, is of paramount importance. He cleared his great throat. I must look further into this matter. It will be an interesting way of passing my final years. The Lady Falazan said gently, The time for leaving has come, Prince Morandi Peg. There is one last great action to be taken. Then this particular stage in the eternal game is completed. We must go to rejoin the rest of our people." Morandi Pag inclined his head. "The ships we bid for you are ready. They await you in our harbour." Von Beck, Alizard, and I were the last to go aboard the slender Eldrin vessels. We remained, almost reluctantly, making our final farewells to the Ursine princes. Not one of us said anything of meeting again. We knew it was never likely to be, and so it was with a special regret that we parted. We three stood on the high aft deck of the final ship to sail out of the harbour, leaving the massive cliffs of Adelstein behind us, sailing beyond the whirlpool crags where Morandi Pag had lived for so long. "Goodbye," I cried as I waved to the last of that noble race. "Goodbye, dear friends." And I heard Morandi Pag call to me, "Goodbye, John Dacre. May your rest be all you desire." We sailed for a day until we came at length to a place where great beams of light pierced the clouds and stroked the rolling sea, rainbow light forming a circle of great pillars, a kind of temple. We had come again to the pillars of paradise. The triangular sails of the Eldrin vessels filled with wind as, one by one, the clever sailors drove their ships between the columns. One by one they vanished until we were the last ship remaining. Then Alizard took the helm. She flung back her head and shouted her song. She was full of joy. It seemed again to me that Ermizad stood there, as she had stood beside me in all our adventurings so long ago. But the man whom this woman loved was not Erekose, the eternal champion. It was Count Ulrich von Beck, nobleman of Saxony, exile from the Nazi obscenity, and that he returned her love was clear. I no longer knew jealousy. That had been an aberration brought about by chaos. But I knew a deep loneliness, a sadness which could never, no matter what befell me, be dismissed. Oh, Ermizad, I mourned for you then as the pillars of paradise drew us inwards and upwards and out into the glorious sun-filled seas of the Gestonheim. Page 647. We sailed now, our convoy of ships, towards Barobane, the old capital of the ghost women. The women who crowded the decks and worked the ships were still dressed in their delicate armour of engraved ivory, though they no longer wore the helmets which had once disguised and protected them by means of instilling fear in potential enemies. When we sailed at last into the burned and wasted harbour and looked upon the black ruins of that town which had once been so lovely, so secure and comfortable and civilized, many of those women wept. Yet the Lady Falison stood upon the pitted stones of the quay, and she addressed the Eldrin women. "This is a memory now. It is a memory we must always keep. But we should not grieve, for soon, if the promise of our legend is true, we shall at last be going to our true home, to the land of our menfolk, and the Eldrin will become strong again in a world which is theirs, in a world which cannot be threatened by savage barbarians of any ilk. We begin a new story for our race, a glorious story. Soon, just as we are united with our men, the she-dragon will be freed and come together with her male, two strong limbs of the same body, equally powerful, equally tender, equally able to build a world even lovelier than the one we knew here. John Dacre, show us the dragon's sword. Show us our hope, our fulfilment, our resolution." At her orders I pushed back my cloak. There on my hip was the sheathed dragon sword, where it had been scabbarded since the fight outside Adelstein. Page 648. I unhooked the scabbard from my belt and held the dragon's sword up for all to see. But I would not draw it.
In my debates with the Lady Philisa, we had agreed that I should draw the blade again only once, and then I swore I should never draw it again. If I could, I would have handed it over to the announcer-elect and let her do what was needed. But it was my fate to be the only one who could handle the poisonous metal of that strange sword. The Eldron women were disembarking, streaming into the broken buildings, the ashes, the fire-darkened timbers of Baron Bernet. "Go," cried Lady Philisa, "bring us that which we have kept throughout our long exile. Bring us the iron round." Von Beck and Alisard came to stand beside me on the quay. We had already discussed what had to be done. Morandi Pag had offered to try to help von Beck return to his own world, but he had elected to stay with Alisard, just as I had once been the only human to remain with the Eldron, with my Ermizard. They linked arms with me, offering me comfort, aiding me in my resolution, for I had made a pact with myself, with John Dacre, and I was determined not to break it. Soon the ghost women, their ivory smeared with black dust, came staggering from out of the ruins. They had with them a large oak chest, borne on poles, slipped through brass loops, set into brass bands binding the wood. It was an ancient chest, plainly, and spoke of a different age altogether. It was like nothing else the Eldron owned. To one side of me the sunshine continued to glint on the blue ocean. To the other the breeze stirred the smoky ashes of the razed town. On the quay itself, and on their slender ships, the Eldron women gave me their full attention, as the oak chest was opened, and out of it was taken the thing they called the iron round. It was a kind of anvil. It was almost as if a section had been cut from a tree trunk and placed upon a pedestal. Then the whole turned into heavy pitted iron. Page 649. It was a small table, yet I could see from its surface that generations of smiths had worked their metal upon it. Into the base of the iron round were carved runes, and these runes resembled many of those I'd seen upon the blade of the dragon's sword. They brought the anvil, and they placed it at my feet. Each of those faces held expectation and hope. This was what they had lived for all those generations, breeding as best they could from the poor stock provided them, resorting to an artificial way of life which they found distasteful, yet maintaining their dream that one day the cosmic mistake which had cost them their menfolk and their future would be corrected. It was for this day, too, that I had striven. All else had been secondary. Out of love for the race which had adopted me, the woman I had loved, and who had loved me with such intensity and depth, I had sought out the dragon's sword. "Unsheath it, champion," cried Lady Philisa. "Unsheath your sword so that we may look upon it for the last time. Unsheath that power which was created to be destroyed, which was forged for chaos to serve law, which was made to resist the balance and to carry out its destiny. Unsheath your powerful blade. Let this be the last act of that hero called the Eternal Champion. In redeeming us, let him also be redeemed. Unsheath the dragon's sword." And I took the scabbard in my left hand, and I took the hilt of the sword in my right, and slowly I slid the sheath away so that the black radiance began to pour out of the green-black metal, carved with so many runes, as if the sword's entire story was written there. In the bright air of the Gestenheim, before the assembled women of the Eldron, I held the blade up high. I let the scabbard fall. I took the dragon's sword in my two hands. I raised it so that all might look upon it,
upon the dark living metal, upon the little yellow flickering flame within.
Page 650.
And the dragon's sword began to sing. It was a wild, sweet song. It was a song so ancient, it spoke of an existence beyond time, beyond all the concerns of mortals and of gods. It spoke of love and hate and murder, of treachery and desire. It spoke of chaos and of law and of the tranquillity of perfect balance. It spoke of the future, the past and the present. And it spoke of all the myriad millions of worlds of the multiverse, all the worlds it had known, all the worlds which remained to be known. And then, to my astonishment, the Eldrin women also gave voice. They sang in perfect harmony with the blade, and I found that I too was singing, though I knew nothing of the words which left my lips. I had never believed myself capable of such wonderful song. The chorus built and built. The dragon's sword throbbed with an ecstasy of its own, an ecstasy reflected in the faces of all who witnessed this ceremony. I lifted the blade above my head. I cried out, yet I did not know what it was I said. I cried out, and my voice held all my own dreams, all my longings, all the hopes and fears of an entire people. I was trembling with exquisite delight, with awe and with something akin to fear, as I began to bring the blade down in one clean sweeping motion upon the iron round. The anvil, which had been all that these women had possessed to remind them of their destiny, now seemed to glow with the same strange light given off by the dragon's sword. The two parts met. There was a huge sound, a sound like the breaking of every planet, every cosmic barrier, every sun in the entire multiverse. A monstrous sound, yet a beautiful sound. It was the sound of fulfilled destiny. And now the sword, which had been heavy for so long, was light in my hands, and I saw that the blade was broken clean in two, that for a moment one part of it was embedded in the iron round while the other remained in my grip. And I shuddered at the incredible sensation of delight which permeated my entire body. And I gasped as I continued to sing my song, the song which the women sang, the song of the Eldrin, the song of the dragon's sword and the iron round.
Page 651.
And I gasped, and I continued to sing my song, the song which the women sang, the song of the Eldrin, the song of the dragon's sword and the iron round. And as we sang, something like flame erupted from the anvil, something which had been released from the sword, and yet which, for a short while, had also inhabited the round. It curled and it writhed, and it too was singing, and the singing became a roar, echoed in the throats of all those women, and the flame grew fiercer and stronger, and it began to take shapes to itself, and colours to itself, and it seemed to me, as I fell away from its enormous might, that this was altogether a more powerful force than any I had witnessed before. For this was the force of human desire, of human will, of human ideals. It grew and grew.
The shard of the sword fell from my hand. I was upon my knees, looking up as the presence took form, roaring still, curling and writhing still, blotting out the sun. It was a huge beast, a dragon whose scales rippled in the glow of the sun, a dragon whose crest burned with the richest colours of the rainbow, a dragon whose red nostrils flared and whose white teeth clashed, whose coils rose skyward with exquisite grace, whose wings spread wider and wider, beating strongly as the beast ascended into the clear blue sky. Yet still the song went on. Still the dragon and the women and I all sang.
Still the anvil sang, though the sword's voice grew fainter now. Up, up it beat, that wonderful creature, up until it turned, weaving and diving, skimming the waters, spearing up again into the sunlight, rejoicing in its strength, in its freedom, in its pure animation. Then the dragon roared, and her breath was warm upon our faces, bringing us too fresh life. She opened her vast mouth, and she clashed her teeth in an orgy of release. She danced for us, she sang for us, she displayed her power for us, and we knew a complete rapport with her. I had known this only once before, and the memory of that time was gone from me. I wept with the pleasure of it. Page 652. Then the she-dragon was turning. Her multicoloured wings, like the wings of some enormous insect, began to beat with a different purpose. She turned her long, saurian head, and she stared at us from out of wise, tender eyes, and again the breath steamed suddenly from her nostrils, and she was calling to us, calling us to follow. Von Beck took my hand. "Come with us, Herr Dacre. Come with us through the dragon gate. We shall know such happiness there." And Alizard clutched my arm. She said, "You will be honoured by all the Eldren now, forever." But I said sadly that it was not to be. I know now that I must find the dark ship again. That is my duty and my destiny. "You said you had no further desire to be a hero." Von Beck was surprised. "That is true, and I will be a hero, will I not, in the Eldren world? My only hope to rid myself of this burden is to remain here. I know that." All the women were now aboard their vessels. Many were already putting out to sea over the white-tipped waves in the wake of the she-dragon. They waved to me as they left, and still they sang. "Go," I told my friends, "go and be happy. That will console me for any loss I promise you." And thus we parted. Von Beck and Alizard were the last to go aboard the final ship which left the harbour. I watched as the wind filled their triangular sail, as the slender prow made a cleft in the gentle waters. The great she-dragon, which had been released at last, according to legend, described a complete circle in the sky overhead, seemingly for the sheer joy of flying. But where she had gone, the circle remained, a blue and red disk which gradually widened until it touched the waters below. The colours became more complex. Thousands of rich, dark shades shimmered above the water, and through this circle now passed the great she-dragon, vanishing almost at once. Then came the ships of the Eldren, and they too were swallowed up. They had rejoined their kind. The dragons and their mortal kin were reunited at last. Page 653. The circle faded. The circle vanished. I was alone in a deserted world. I was alone. I looked down at the two halves of the sword, at the anvil. Both seemed to have sustained enormous forces. It was as if they had melted, yet held their shape. I was not sure why I had this impression. I stirred the hilt of the sword with my foot. For a moment I was tempted to pick it up, but then I turned aside with a shrug. I wanted no further business with swords or magic or destiny. I wanted only to go home. I left the harbour behind me. I walked amongst the miserable ruins of the Eldren town. I remembered such destruction. I remembered when, as Erekose, champion of humanity, I had led my armies against a town similar to this, against a people called the Eldren. I remembered that crime,
and I remembered another crime when I had led the Eldron against my own folk. Somehow, however, the pang of guilt I had known since then was no longer present. I felt that all was now redeemed again. I had made amends, and I was whole. Yet I still knew the loss of Amizad. Would I ever be united with her? Later towards evening I found myself again on the quayside, looking out towards the setting sun. Everything was silent. Everything was calm. Yet it was a solitude I did not relish, for it was the result of an absence of life. A few seabirds wheeled and called. The waves slapped against the stones of the quay. I sat down on the iron round, again contemplating the 2 shards of the dragon's sword, wondering if perhaps I should have gone with the Eldron back to their own world. And then I heard the sound of horses behind me. I turned. A single rider leading another steed, a small, ill-formed fellow, all in motley. He grinned at me and saluted. Page 654. "Will you come a-riding with me, Sir Champion? I would relish the company." "Good evening to you, Germaise. I trust you have not brought me further news of destiny and doom." I climbed into the saddle of the horse. "I never cared much for those things," he said. "As you know, it is not my business to play an important part in the history of the multiverse. These past times are perhaps the most active I have seen. I do not regret it, though I should have liked to have witnessed Sharadim's defeat and the banishment of chaos. You performed a mighty task, Sir Champion, perhaps the greatest of your career." I shook my head. I did not know. Germaise led the way from the quay and along the shore of the sea beside the white cliffs. The sun made the sky a wonderful deep colour. It touched the sea. It made all seem permanent and unassailable. "Your friends have gone now, have they?" he asked as we rode. "Dragon to dragon, Eldron to Eldon. And Vombeck, what sort of dynasty will he found, I wonder? And what sort of history will come out of all that went on here? Another cycle must begin before we shall get any hint of the fate of Melibone." The name was familiar to me. It stirred the faintest memory, but I dismissed it. I wanted no more of memories, whether they be of past or future. Soon it was night. Moonlight was pure silver upon the water, and we rounded a headland with the tide rolling at our horses' feet. I saw the outline of a ship at anchor in the little bay. The ship had high decks, fore and aft, and its timbers were carved with all manner of baroque designs. There was a broad sweeping curve to her prow, and her single mast was tall, bearing a single large furled sail. I could see that on each of her raised decks the ship had a wheel, as if she could be steered from stern or prow. She sat lightly on the water, like a vessel awaiting fresh cargo. Germaise and I rode our horses through the shallows. I heard him cry, "Hello, the ship! Are you taking on passengers?" Page 655. Now a figure appeared at the rail, leaning on it and apparently staring out over our heads towards the cliffs. I saw at once that he was blind. A red mist had begun to form in the water about the ship. It was faint, and yet it seemed to stir not with the movements of the sea itself, but with the movements of the dark vessel. I looked out across the ocean, but the moon was hidden behind clouds, and I could see little. It seemed that the red mist was growing. "Come aboard," said the blind man. "You are welcome." "Now we must part," said Germaise. "I think it will be long before we meet again, perhaps in another cycle altogether. Farewell, Sir Champion." He clapped me on the back, and then,
had turned his horse and was galloping back through the water to the shore. I heard the hooves thumping on sand, and he had vanished. My own horse was restless. I dismounted and let him go. He followed Germai's. I waded through the water. It was warm against my body. It had reached as high as my chest before I could catch hold of a trailing ladder and begin to climb aboard. The red mist had grown thicker now. It obscured all sight of the shore. The blind man sniffed the air. "We must be on our way. I am glad you decided to come. You have no sword now, eh?" "I have no need of one," I said. He grunted in reply and then called out for the sail to be unfurled. I saw the shadows of men in the rigging as I followed the blind helmsman to his cabin, where his brother the captain waited for us. I heard the sail crack down and the wind tug urgently at it. I heard the anchors raised. I felt the ship pull suddenly and roll and swing out to sea, and I knew that once again we were sailing through waters which flowed between the worlds. The captain's bright blue eyes were kindly as he indicated the food prepared for me. "You must be weary, John Dacre. You have done much, eh?" Page 656. I stripped off my heavy leathers. I sighed with relief as I poured myself wine. "Are there others aboard tonight?" I asked. "Of your kind? Only yourself. And where do we sail?" I was reconciled to whatever instructions I might be given. "Oh, nowhere of any great importance. You have no sword, I note." "Your brother has already remarked upon that. I left it broken on the quayside at Baron-Bonnet. It is useless now." "Not quite," said the captain, joining me in a goblet of wine, "but it will need to be reforged, perhaps as two swords, where it was once one." "A new sword for each part. Is there enough metal for that?" "I think so, but that will not concern you for a while at any rate. Would you sleep now?" "I am tired," I said. I felt as if I had not rested for centuries. The blind helmsman led me to my old familiar bunk. I stretched myself out, and almost immediately I began to dream. I dreamed of King Rishnov and Ermizard, of Erlik's castle, and all the other heroes I had been. And then I dreamed of dragons, hundreds of dragons, dragons whom I knew by name, dragons who loved me as I loved them, and I dreamed of great fleets, of wars, of tragedies, of impossible delights, of wizardry and wild romance. I dreamed of white arms locked around me. I dreamed again of Ermizard, and then I dreamed that we had come together again at last, and I awoke laughing, remembering something of that dragon song which the Eldron women had sung. The blind helmsman and his brother the captain stood there. They too were smiling. "It is time to disembark, John Dacre. It is time for you to go to your reward." I got up then. I was dressed only in a pair of leather breeches and boots, but it did not feel cold. I followed them out into the darkness of the deck. Page 657. A few yellow lamps gleamed here and there. Through the red mist, I saw the suggestion of a shoreline. I saw first one tower, and then a second. They seemed to be spanning a harbour. I peered through the darkness, trying to distinguish details. The towers looked familiar. Now the blind helmsman called to me from below. He was in a small boat waiting to carry me to land. I bade farewell to the captain, and I climbed down to the boat, seating myself on the bench. The helmsman pulled strongly on his oars. The red mist grew dimmer still. It seemed close to dawn. The twin towers had a bridge spanning them. Elsewhere were thousands of lights gleaming. I heard the mournful hoot of what I thought at first was a great water beast. Then I realized it was a boat.
The helmsman shipped his oars. "You are at your destination now, John Dacre. I wish you good fortune." Cautiously I stepped onto the slippery mud of the shore. I heard a drone from above me. I heard voices. And then, as the helmsman disappeared back into the red mist, I realized that I'd been in this place before. The twin towers were those of Tower Bridge. The sounds I heard were the sounds of a great modern city, the sounds of London. John Dacre was returning home. Epilogue. My name is John Dacre. I was once called the Eternal Champion. It is possible I shall bear that name once again. For now, however, I am at peace. By summoning up this identity, the original, if you will, I was able to resist and ultimately defeat the powers of chaos. My reward for this action is that I am allowed to resume my life as John Dacre. When called by King Rhysnos to be humanity's champion, I had been discontented with my life. I had seen it as shallow, without colour. Yet I had come to realize how rich my life actually is, how complex is the world I inhabit. That complexity alone is worthy of celebration. I understand that life in a great city of my world's 20th century can be just as intense, just as satisfactory as any other. Indeed, to be a hero, forever at war, is to be in some ways always a child. The true challenge comes in making sense of one's life, of imbuing it with purpose based on one's own principles. I still have memory of those other times. I still dream frequently of the great battle blades, the chargers, the massive fighting barges, the weird creatures, and the magical cities, the bright banners and the wonder of perfect love. I dream of riding against chaos, of bearing arms against heaven in the name of hell, of being the scythe which cut humanity down. But I have discovered an equal intensity of experience in this world too. We have merely, I think, to teach ourselves how to recognize and to relish it. That is what I learned when I faced the Archduke Balazirsaf, Princess Sharadim, and Prince Flamadin at the world's beginning, when we struggled for the dragon's sword. Page 659. It is ironic that I saved both myself and those I cared for by recalling at the crucial moment my identity as an ordinary mortal. There are subtle dangers to the role of hero. I am glad I no longer have to consider them. So John Dacre has returned home. The cycle is complete. The saga finds a form of resolution. Somewhere, doubtless, the eternal champion will continue to fight to maintain the cosmic balance. And in his dreams, if nowhere else, John Dacre will recall those battles as he will sometimes recall a vast field of statues, all of which seem to bear his name. For the present, however, he need take no further part in battles, nor wonder at the significance of that field. I still long, of course, for my Ermizade. I shall never love anyone as I loved her. I believe I must surely find her, not in some bizarre realm of the multiverse, but here perhaps in this city, in London. Does she look for me, even now as I search for her? It surely cannot be very long before we are reunited. And when that time comes, there is no sword forged in this world or any other which will divide us. We shall know peace. Though our span of years be those of ordinary human beings, they will be our own years. We shall be free of all cosmic designs, free of destinies and grandiose dooms. We shall be free to love as we were always meant to love, free to be the flawed, finite, mortal creatures which from the first was all we ever wished to be. And for those years at least, the eternal champion, will be at rest.